For 5 years, my parents told everyone I disappeared after I stopped sending money home. They spun a tragic tale claiming their daughter abandoned her family duties. So when they tracked down the address where they assumed I was working as a maid, they sent my older brother Jamal to collect what they believed I owed them. He pounded on the custom oak doors, ready to demand his cut. But when the doors swung open, he did not find a housekeeper. Instead, he looked past my tailored silk loungewear and the crystal wine glass in my hand. His eyes widened, taking in the indoor waterfall, the string quartet playing softly, and the elite guests mingling in the grand foyer. He went pale, stumbled backward down the stone steps, and pressed his phone to his ear, whispering, "Mom, you need to see this. She never told us. My name is Naomi. I am 31 years old, and I am about to show the people who used me exactly what happens when the family bank account becomes the bank owner." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family. Jamal was the golden child. At 34, he was the son who could do no wrong. I was simply the workhorse, the sensible daughter whose sole purpose was to act as the family ATM. From the moment I landed my first corporate job, my income was treated as community property. If Jamal needed a new car, I was expected to co-sign the loan. In their eyes, black excellence meant shared excellence, but somehow the sharing only ever flowed out of my pockets and into theirs. When I walked away 5 years ago, I severed every tie. I changed my number, moved across the country, and scrubbed my digital footprint. I spent those years building my own empire entirely in the shadows. I transitioned from a corporate strategist to acquiring distressed real estate and eventually founded my own private equity firm. Today, I own Vanguard Capital and the $15 million estate in Buckhead, Atlanta, where Jamal was currently having a mental breakdown. The pounding had started precisely at 7 in the evening. I was hosting a private networking mixer for a select group of investors. I was wearing a midnight blue silk set, holding a glass of vintage Cabernet, when my head of security approached me. He informed me that a man matching my brother's description was screaming at the gate, demanding to see the maid named Naomi. Instead of having him escorted away, I told security to buzz him through. I walked to the grand entrance, myself, heels clicking softly against the marble floors. When I pulled open the heavy double doors, Jamal had his fist raised. He was wearing a flashy designer suit that I knew he could not afford, his face twisted into that familiar mask of entitled rage. "Well, look who decided to finally show her face," he sneered, trying to push past me. "Go get your purse, Naomi. Mom and Dad are tired of waiting for their money. We know you are working here, hiding out in some rich person's house. You owe us." He stopped mid-sentence. His arrogant smirk melted off his face as his eyes adjusted to the lighting inside the mansion. He took in the vaulted ceilings, the massive crystal chandelier sparkling overhead, and the modern art pieces lining the gallery walls. He saw the catered champagne tower and the private chef in the open kitchen. And then he finally looked at me. He took in the expensive silk, the perfectly styled hair, and the flawless diamond necklace resting against my collarbone. "Whose house is this?" Jamal asked, his voice suddenly losing all its volume. "What kind of maid wears that?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, tasting the rich, dark notes, before giving him a calm, icy smile. "I am not a maid, Jamal. And you are trespassing on private property." He blinked, stumbling backward, as if the marble steps had suddenly turned to ice. The sister he viewed as a subservient cash cow was standing in a palace that made his fake CEO lifestyle look like a joke. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He hit speed dial and backed down the steps, never taking his eyes off me. "Mom, you need to get up here right now," he whispered into the receiver, his voice trembling with shock and terror. "You need to see this." She never told us. I did not close the door. I simply stood there watching him hyperventilate on my driveway. I knew exactly who was waiting in the car outside the main gates. My parents, Vivian and Marcus, along with Jamal's white wife, Harper. Harper had always treated me with a thick layer of condescension, acting as if marrying my brother made her part of some elite dynasty. She constantly threw microaggressions my way, assuming I was uneducated because I did not flaunt my wealth. I raised my free hand and gave a subtle signal to my head of security. "Let them in," I instructed softly. Let the whole car through the gates. Within seconds, the wrought iron gates swung open. A sleek black Mercedes Maybach rolled up the illuminated driveway. I recognized it as a luxury rental leased to make an impression. The car came to a smooth halt next to the courtyard fountain. The doors opened. My mother Vivian stepped out first, her face set in a scowl. My father Marcus followed, puffing out his chest. Finally, Harper emerged from the back seat, adjusting her designer sunglasses. Harper took one look at the magnificent estate, then looked at me standing in the doorway. She let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Well, Naomi," she called out, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "Is the homeowner away? It is incredibly bold of the help to entertain her deadbeat family at the front door." I smiled calmly, letting her insult hang in the cool evening air. I took another slow sip of my wine, the crystal clinking softly. "Come in," I said, my voice perfectly level, stepping aside and gesturing toward the grand foyer. "We have a lot to discuss about your impending eviction." Harper faltered, her smug expression cracking for a fraction of a second. She glanced at Jamal, who was still standing completely frozen on the steps. "My mother." Vivian scoffed loudly, pushing past Jamal and storming up to the threshold. She adjusted her designer knockoff jacket and glared at me. "Eviction," she snapped. "You have a lot of nerve, Naomi. You disappear for half a decade, leave your brother to shoulder the burdens of this family, and now you want to play games. Get your things and let us get out of here before the real owners call the police." I did not argue. I simply turned and led them through the main hall. My heels echoed on the imported Italian marble. I bypassed the main entertaining areas where my networking event was in full swing. I did not want their toxic energy ruining a room full of actual billionaires and influential politicians. Instead, I guided them down a quiet, private corridor into a secondary sitting room. Even this room, the smallest and least impressive in my home, was dripping with immense wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the manicured gardens, and plush velvet sofas circled a massive custom glass table. They stepped inside and the silence was deafening. My father Marcus looked around with wide eyes, his chest deflating as he took in the sheer scale of the luxury. Harper practically vibrated with a mix of awe and furious jealousy. She ran her hand over the back of a velvet chair, inspecting the quality of the fabric. Jamal finally shuffled into the room, looking like a completely deflated balloon. "Sit," I commanded. Nobody moved at first, so I took my seat at the head of the glass table, crossing my legs. Vivian was the first to break the silence. She dramatically collapsed onto the sofa, pressing a hand to her chest. She forced a wet sheen into her eyes, playing the victim card, exactly as she always did whenever she needed to manipulate a situation. "I cannot believe you," she wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. 5 years, Naomi. 5 long, agonizing years without a single phone call. Do you know what you put us through? Do you know how hard Jamal has had to work to keep this family afloat while you were gone? You were supposed to be our support system. We raised you. We put food in your mouth. And the moment you started making decent money, you turned your back on your own blood. You abandoned your duty." I watched her perform, feeling absolutely nothing. The guilt trips that used to keep me up at night now sounded like a poorly rehearsed stage play. "It is downright disgraceful," Marcus chimed in, standing behind Vivian. Like a loyal guard dog, a successful black family relies on absolute unity. When one rises, we all rise together. But you decided you were too good for us. You left your brother drowning in responsibility while you what? Found some rich man to sponsor your lifestyle. Harper let out a sharp, condescending laugh. She crossed her arms and stared at me with open disgust. "Oh, please, Marcus, do not give her that much credit," she sneered. "We all know how this works in the real world. Nobody goes from middle management to living in a Buckhead mansion legally. She is either funneling money for someone shady, or she is playing house for an old billionaire who likes the exotic aesthetic. It is actually quite sad, Naomi. You could have helped Jamal build a legitimate tech empire, but you chose this dirty lifestyle instead." Her microaggressions were so predictable, they were almost boring. She genuinely believed that a black woman could not acquire this level of wealth through sheer intellect and ruthlessness. She needed to frame me as a criminal or a commodity to protect her own fragile ego and justify her terrible life choices. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my honor. I simply reached into the side drawer of the glass table and pulled out a thick manila folder. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "I did not disappear, Mom," I said, leaning forward, resting my arms on the glass. I ran. Vivian stopped her fake crying, wiping her dry cheeks. Ran from what she demanded, crossing her arms defensively. "From federal prison," I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly calm register. "Open the folder, Jamal. Let your wife see exactly how you built your so-called legitimate tech empire." Jamal refused to move. He stared at the folder as if it were a live explosive. Harper rolled her eyes, snatched the folder from the table, and flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Her brow furrowed in deep confusion. "These are loan documents," she said, holding up a bank statement. "For $500,000. So what? Jamal secured this funding for his first startup 5 years ago." "Look closer," Harper I instructed, pointing at the page. "Look at the guarantor signature on the bottom line. Look at the social security number attached to the massive debt." Harper squinted at this page. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking entirely washed out. She looked at Jamal, then back at the paper. "It says Naomi," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I sat back in my chair, letting the absolute truth suffocate the room. 5 years ago, I went to apply for a mortgage on a small townhouse," I said, addressing the room but keeping my eyes locked on my mother. "The bank denied me immediately. They told me my credit was completely destroyed. They told me I had defaulted on multiple massive business loans. Loans I had never seen or signed for in my entire life." Vivian looked away, refusing to meet my piercing gaze. Marcus suddenly found the intricate pattern on the rug fascinating. "You stole my identity." I continued, my voice slicing through their cowardly silence like a freshly sharpened blade. "You and Dad took all of my personal information, forged my signature, and used my spotless credit to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans for Jamal, because the banks knew his business plan was garbage and refused to fund him. You sacrificed my future, my financial security, and my freedom, so your golden boy could play CEO. If I had stayed, if I had reported the massive fraud to the police, you and Dad would have gone to federal prison. So I ran. I let you keep the stolen money, and I started over from zero." Harper whipped her head toward Jamal, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. "You told me you got that money from angel investors, Jamal. You told me you were a brilliant self-made founder. You stole it from your own sister." Jamal finally found his voice, but instead of apologizing, he puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim his fading dominance. "We are a family," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I needed that seed money, and your credit score was perfect. It is a daughter's job to uplift her brother. You were making a decent salary, you did not need the capital like I did. I was building a legacy for all of us to share." "A legacy of absolute failure," I corrected coldly. "You blew through that $500,000 in less than a year on leased luxury cars and VIP tables at clubs." Marcus slammed his heavy fist down on the glass table, rattling the entire surface. "Watch your mouth when you speak to your older brother," he bellowed, his face contorting with arrogant rage. "We did what we had to do for the ultimate survival of this family. We made a hard choice and you survived just fine. Look around you, you are sitting in a mansion." He stepped forward aggressively, his eyes sweeping the luxurious room with a sudden predatory gleam. He completely ignored the revelation of his own terrible crimes and focused entirely on my apparent wealth. In fact, Marcus continued, a greedy smile spreading across his face. "You are doing better than fine. You owe us for putting you in a position to hustle this hard. We are struggling right now, Naomi. Jamal's current investors are breathing down his neck. The bank is threatening to take our house. But clearly, you have plenty to spare. We are moving into this rented mansion tonight. You are going to clear your brother's debts, and you are going to take care of your parents. That is final." The sheer audacity of his demand hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Marcus stood there, chest puffed out, genuinely believing he still held any authority over my life. He had just admitted to ruining my credit to fund a fraudulent business, and his immediate conclusion was that I owed them a place to live. I did not scream. I did not throw my wine in his face. I simply leaned back into the plush velvet of my chair and let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a cold sound that made Vivian flinch and Harper narrow her eyes. Before I could verbally dissect his delusion, the heavy mahogany doors of the sitting room swung open. The interruption was sudden and jarring. My security team usually kept guests confined to the main ballroom, but the man who stepped through the doorway was not a standard guest. He was a VIP who had the clearance to walk the estate freely. He was a tall, distinguished older white man, wearing a bespoke tuxedo, holding a crystal tumbler of bourbon. He paused mid-step, looking mildly surprised to find the room occupied. He blinked, adjusting his glasses as his gaze swept over Marcus in his cheap suit, Vivian in her knockoff designer wear, and Jamal, who suddenly looked as if he had seen a ghost. Harper gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth. Jamal physically recoiled, his arrogant posture instantly dissolving into absolute panic. He quickly shoved his father aside, almost knocking Marcus over, and practically sprinted toward the doorway. His hands were sweating, and his voice cracked as he attempted to project an air of professional familiarity. "Mr. Sterling," Jamal stammered, extending a trembling hand. "William Sterling, I cannot believe you are here. What an incredible honor. I am Jamal from Novatech Solutions. We met briefly at the banking summit last quarter. My company holds our primary commercial credit line with your institution. We have been trying to schedule a meeting with your loan restructuring office for weeks." Harper was immediately at his side, entirely abandoning her disdain for me to play the role of the supportive corporate wife. She smoothed her dress and flashed a brilliant practiced smile. "Mr. Sterling, it is such a privilege," she purred, stepping forward to insert herself into his line of sight. "We are so thrilled to run into you. My husband is working on some revolutionary software updates, and we would love to discuss a brief extension on our current capital repayment schedule. We are just having a minor family dispute with the help right now, so please excuse the mess." She turned her head and shot me a venomous glare, snapping her fingers exactly as one would to dismiss a dog. "Naomi, get out of here," she hissed under her breath, her tone laced with racial superiority and classist entitlement. "Leave the room immediately. You are embarrassing us. We are talking to the CEO of the most powerful corporate bank in Atlanta. Go fetch more wine or clean something. The adults are doing business." William Sterling did not shake Jamal's hand. He did not return Harper's smile. He stood perfectly still, looking at their outstretched hands, as if they were covered in something foul. His eyes drifted from Jamal's sweating forehead to Harper's aggressive stance, and then he looked past them entirely. His gaze found me sitting calmly at the head of the glass table. The banking titan, the man who held the absolute power to destroy Jamal's entire life with a single phone call, ignored them completely. He stepped around Jamal, brushing past Harper as if they were invisible obstacles. He walked directly to my chair, stopped, and bowed his head in a gesture of absolute deference. "Madam Chairman," he said, his voice echoing loudly in the silent room. "I apologize for interrupting your family time. My team just sent over the finalized acquisition documents. The board has unanimously approved your terms. Vanguard Capital is now the majority shareholder of Sterling Bank. We are ready for your signature whenever you have a moment." The air vanished from the room. The silence that followed his words was so profound I could hear the gentle hum of the climate control system. Jamal stood frozen, his hands still awkwardly suspended in the air. His eyes darted between William Sterling and me, his brain completely failing to process the reality unfolding in front of him. Marcus and Vivian looked paralyzed, their mouths hanging open in identical expressions of utter shock. Harper was the first to break the silence. Her voice was shrill, frantic, and entirely stripped of its previous polish. "What did you just call her?" she demanded, taking a step toward William Sterling. "Madam Chairman. Mr. Sterling, you must be confused. She is just a maid. She is Jamal's runaway sister. She does not own anything. She is just squatting here." William Sterling turned to look at Harper. The expression on his face was one of pure, unfiltered disgust. He adjusted his cufflinks slowly, deliberately, before speaking. "I do not know who you are," he said, his tone freezing the room, "but I suggest you watch your tone. You are currently standing in the private residence of Naomi, the founder and sole owner of Vanguard Capital. She is the billionaire who just acquired 51% of my bank. And judging by the name Novatech Solutions you just mentioned, she is also the person who currently owns every single cent of your husband's miserable debt." Harper physically stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a side table. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking entirely sickly. She looked at Jamal, seeking some kind of reassurance, but Jamal was hyperventilating, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. The sister he had come to extort the woman his wife had just called the help was the supreme authority over their entire financial existence. Vivian's fake tears instantly vanished. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. Her daughter was not just surviving, she was a titan. The greed returned to Vivian's eyes, instantly wiping away the shock. She rushed forward, shoving Jamal out of the way, and threw her arms open wide. "Naomi, my beautiful, brilliant girl." Vivian shrieked, her voice pitching upward in a desperate attempt to sound maternal. "I knew it. I always knew you were destined for greatness. The struggle made you so strong. God has blessed you immensely. And now you can save us. You can wipe out your brother's debt right now. You can pay off the bank. We are your family. We are your blood." I set my wine glass down on the table. The sharp clink made Vivian flinch. I looked at her outstretched arms and felt a wave of profound repulsion. I did not stand up. I did not embrace her. "Why would I save a company that has not produced a single working product in 3 years?" I asked, my voice echoing with icy detachment. "Why would I spend a single dime of my wealth to rescue a brother who gladly let me take the fall for his felony fraud?" Harper snapped out of her shock, her entitlement flaring back to life. She stomped her foot, her face turning a mottled red. "Because he is your brother!" she screamed, losing all sense of decorum. "He is my husband. We have a child. Are you really so bitter and heartless that you would see your own nephew thrown out on the streets just to prove a point? You have billions. Paying off his debt is nothing to you. You are a monster if you let him fail." I smiled warmly at her outburst. It was the exact reaction I had been waiting for. I pressed a button on my tablet, and my head of security immediately stepped into the room holding a thick leather-bound file. He handed it to me and stepped back. "Let us talk about your nephew Harper," I said softly, opening the file. "Or rather, let us talk about how Jamal has actually been spending the venture capital he begged from his parents and stole from my credit line. Let us talk about his frequent trips to Las Vegas and the luxury boutiques where he funds your shopping sprees while his employees go unpaid." I opened the leather-bound file and spread the documents across the immaculate glass table. The glossy pages caught the light from the chandelier, illuminating the catastrophic reality of Jamal and his fraudulent empire. I did not need to raise my voice. The undeniable proof spoke loud enough to shatter the foundation of their entire existence. Here are the audited financials for Nova Tech Solutions. I began tapping a manicured fingernail against a spreadsheet highlighted in bright red. "Over the past 3 years, your company has received roughly $4 million in venture capital, including the loans you illegally secured using my stolen identity and the second mortgage Mom and Dad took out on their house. Yet according to my forensic accounting team, Novatech has 0 proprietary code, 0 active patents, and exactly 2 employees on payroll. One is you, Jamal. The other is a personal assistant who spends her entire day booking your flights to Nevada." Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. Harper snatched the spreadsheet from the table, her eyes darting frantically across the columns of numbers. "Let us look at the burn rate." I continued, smoothly sliding a stack of credit card statements toward her. "Your brilliant husband did not invest that capital into research and development. He invested it into the Bellagio casino. $2 million lost at the high-limit baccarat tables. Another $500,000 spent on private jet charters. And let us not forget the $400,000 funneled directly into your personal checking account, Harper, to maintain the illusion that you married black tech royalty." Harper stared at the statements, her hands trembling so violently the paper audibly rattled. She saw the charges for luxury boutiques, the 5-star resorts, and the custom jewelry. Then her eyes landed on a specific line item. Her face twisted into a mask of pure confusion and rage. "A $75,000 charge at Cartier," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Jamal, you told me that was a business expense for client gifts. You never gave me anything from Cartier. Who did you buy diamonds for?" Jamal took a step back, holding his hands up defensively. "Harper, baby, I can explain. It was for a marketing executive. We had to secure a vendor contract and she wanted a specific piece. It was strictly business, I swear. I slid a photograph across the glass table. It was a picture taken from a society blog showing Jamal at a charity gala in Miami, with his arm wrapped tightly around a local Instagram model. She was wearing a stunning, recognizable diamond collar. I do not think she is a marketing executive, I stated coldly. The sound of Harper's palm striking Jamal's face echoed through the sitting room like a gunshot. The physical impact sent him stumbling backward into a velvet armchair. Harper lunged at him, her perfectly manicured facade disintegrating into absolute fury. She pummeled his chest, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You lied to me," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You told me you were building a unicorn startup. You told me we were going to be richer than everyone in my family. You took my youth, you gave me a child, and you spent our entire future on gambling and other women. You are a broke, pathetic fraud." Vivian shrieked, rushing forward to pull Harper off her precious golden boy. "Stop it," she wailed, grabbing Harper's arms. "Do not hit my son. He made mistakes, but the pressure of being a CEO is immense. You do not understand the stress he is under." Marcus grabbed Jamal's shoulder, pulling him upright and glaring at Harper. "Get a hold of yourself, woman," he barked. "This is a private family matter. We do not air our dirty laundry, and we certainly do not assault each other." Marcus then turned his aggressive glare toward me. "This is exactly what you wanted, is it not, Naomi? You wanted to humiliate your brother. You wanted to destroy his marriage. You are a sick, bitter girl." I sat perfectly still, my posture relaxed. "I did not destroy his marriage, Dad. I simply provided the receipts. Jamal destroyed his own life the moment he decided fraud was easier than hard work." Vivian left Harper's side and rushed to the glass table. She fell to her knees, the silk of her dress pooling on the marble floor. She clasped her hands together, tears streaming down her face in a desperate theatrical display. "Naomi, please," she begged, her voice trembling with absolute desperation. "You proved your point. You are the successful one. You won. But you cannot let your brother go to jail. You cannot let the bank take our house. You own the bank now. You have billions of dollars. 5 million is nothing to you. It is pocket change. Just write a check, Naomi. Clear the debt. Save his company. Save our family. If you pay it off right now, we can put all this ugliness behind us and start over as a loving family." I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me. I saw no maternal love in her eyes, only a parasitic greed scrambling to survive. The audacity to demand my wealth after actively ruining my life was staggering, but it was not surprising. "You think this is about the money?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper that commanded the entire room to fall silent. "You think I ran away, cut contact, and hid from the world for 5 years just because of a forged bank loan?" Marcus puffed out his chest, attempting to assert his paternal authority one last time. "It was a necessary sacrifice," he grumbled, "and clearly it did not hurt you. So write the check and do your duty to this family." I reached into the very bottom of the manila folder. I pulled out 3 thick stapled packets of paper and laid them side by side on the glass. The stark white pages contrasted sharply against the dark mahogany details of the room. "I did not leave because you stole my credit," I said, staring directly into Vivian's terrified eyes. "I left because I found out what you were planning to do when my credit ran out." Jamal stopped rubbing his slapped cheek. He stared at the 3 packets, a sudden look of genuine horror washing over his face. He knew exactly what they were. "These are 3 separate life insurance policies," I stated, my voice echoing like a judge's gavel. "Each policy is worth $2 million. You and Dad took them out on my life 5 years ago, right around the time the bank started calling about Jamal's defaulted loans." Harper stopped sobbing and looked at the papers, her mouth hanging open. I was struggling with severe depression back then. I continued the memory of that dark time fueling the icy fire in my veins. The stress of my corporate job and the constant financial demands from this family had pushed me to the absolute edge. I was barely surviving. And instead of getting me help, instead of being a mother, you saw an opportunity. You knew I was suicidal. You took out these policies and named Jamal as the sole beneficiary. You did not want my credit, Mom. You were betting on my death so your golden child could get a massive payout to fund his fake lifestyle. The air in the room turned freezing cold. Even Marcus took a step back, his blustering arrogance finally collapsing under the weight of his own monstrous actions. "You were waiting for me to die," I said. standing up from my chair and towering over Vivian, who was still kneeling on the floor. I am not writing a check. I am not saving this family. You are all going to face exactly what you deserve. Jamal let out a guttural, desperate roar. The realization that his safety net was completely gone, that his fraud was exposed, and his impending ruin was absolute finally shattered his mind. He lunged across the glass table, his hands reaching out to grab my throat. "Sign the bank guarantee," he screamed, his face contorted into something unrecognizable. "Sign it right now." Before his fingers could even brush the silk of my collar, my private security team materialized from the shadows. Two massive men in tailored suits intercepted him mid-lunge, tackling him effortlessly to the imported marble floor. The impact shook the room and Jamal's face was pinned firmly against the cold stone. Harper let out a piercing shriek, stepping back as if the marble floor had suddenly caught fire. "You cannot do this," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "We will sue you for every penny you have, Naomi. We will call the police and have you arrested for assault. I will make sure the press hears about how you violently attack your own family." I remained in my seat, watching the pathetic display, with complete indifference. "Call them, Harper," I challenged, resting my chin on my hand. "Tell the police how your husband lunged at me in my own home. My security cameras have captured every second of this interaction in glorious high definition. And while the authorities are here, we can hand over the evidence of the federal wire fraud and the forged life insurance policies. I am sure the district attorney would love to have a chat with all of you." Harper snapped her mouth shut, her chest heaving as the reality of her powerlessness finally sank in. She looked down at Jamal, who was grunting and struggling fruitlessly against the weight of my security detail. "Release him just enough so he can breathe," I instructed my guards. "But if he twitches, pin him back down." The guards eased up slightly, allowing Jamal to turn his head. His expensive suit was crumpled, and his cheek was pressed against the cold stone. He looked up at me with eyes full of venom, but before he could spit out whatever insult he was formulating, a sharp electronic ringing pierced the silence of the room. The sound was coming from Jamal's jacket pocket. His custom ringtone blared aggressively, demanding attention. Jamal froze. He knew exactly who was calling him at this hour. His eyes darted toward his pocket, and a new wave of panic washed over his face, replacing the anger. "Let me answer that," he gasped, struggling against the guard holding his arm. "I have to answer that. It is my lead accountant. We are in the middle of a critical funding round." I gave a subtle nod to the guard. "Extract the phone and put it on speaker," I ordered. "Let us all hear how the funding round is going." The guard reached into Jamal's pocket, pulled out the sleek device, and tapped the green button before setting it on the glass table. The speakerphone activated, filling the quiet room with the frantic, breathless voice of a man on the edge of a breakdown. "Jamal, where have you been?" the accountant shouted, his voice tight with sheer panic. "I have been calling you for 20 minutes. We have a massive problem. The worst-case scenario just happened." Jamal strained his neck toward the table, his voice shaking. "What is it, Marcus? Did the venture capital firm pull out?" "Tell me they did not pull out." "It is not the venture capital firm," Jamal the accountant cried out, sounding as if he was tearing his hair out. "It is our primary creditor. They just executed the immediate repayment clause on all our outstanding lines of credit, every single one of them. They are demanding full payment by the close of business today, and they have already frozen our operating accounts." The blood drained from Jamal's face, leaving him looking like a corpse. "What do you mean they executed the repayment clause?" he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "They cannot do that. We had an extension agreement. We were negotiating the terms just yesterday. They promised us another 90 days. They lied," Jamal the accountant yelled back. "The original holding company sold our debt portfolio yesterday afternoon. The new holding company refused to honor the verbal extension. They bought the debt specifically to call it in. The bank has already initiated the asset seizure protocols. Jamal, we are bankrupt. The company is completely insolvent as of 10 minutes ago. We cannot even make payroll tomorrow morning. It is over." Jamal stared at the phone, his mind completely failing to process the magnitude of the destruction. He shook his head wildly, muttering under his breath, "No, no, no, this cannot be happening. Who bought the debt, Marcus? Who the hell buys distressed debt just to instantly liquidate a company? Give me the name of the holding company right now. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass table. My voice was calm and steady, carrying the weight of absolute finality. I can save Marcus the trouble of looking it up, Jamal. Jamal stopped struggling. Harper froze. Vivian and my father stared at me, their eyes wide with dawning horror. The holding company is called Vanguard Capital, I stated, watching the realization hit him like a physical blow. I spent the last 5 years building my firm by acquiring distressed assets and unrecoverable debts. I bought your debt, Jamal. I bought every single commercial loan, every credit line, and every outstanding invoice attached to Novatech Solutions. I became your primary creditor 6 months ago, and I have been quietly tightening the noose ever since. You, Jamal gasped, his voice cracking as the devastating truth shattered his entire world. You destroyed my company. I simply collected what was owed. I corrected coldly. You destroyed your own company the moment you decided to build it on stolen money and my forged signature. I just made sure the house of cards collapsed while you were sitting on my floor. Harper stared at me, her jaw dropping as the absolute finality of the situation washed over her. She looked down at Jamal, who was now openly sobbing against the marble tile, his carefully constructed facade of wealth and power entirely annihilated. The man she had married for his perceived status was now a bankrupt fraud facing potential federal prison time. In a display of brutal, breathtaking opportunism, Harper did exactly what parasites do when the host dies. She stood up straight, smoothing her designer dress, and completely detached herself from the man bleeding out on the floor. She reached for her left hand and forcefully pulled the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. It was a fake diamond anyway, paid for with stolen funds, but the gesture was deeply symbolic. She tossed the ring onto the glass table where it clattered against the financial documents. I am not going down for your crimes, Jamal, she said, her voice completely devoid of any affection or loyalty. I married a CEO, not a felon. I am calling my lawyer right now. I am filing for divorce and I am taking sole custody of our son. Do not ever contact me again. Without a single backward glance, Harper turned on her heel and marched out of the sitting room. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind her, leaving a suffocating silence in her wake. The great love story built on my stolen credit had dissolved in less than 60 seconds. Vivian let out a guttural wail, falling to her knees and reaching out toward the closed door. No, she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. Harper, come back. You cannot take my grandson away. Please do not take him. She turned her tear-streaked face toward me, her eyes wide with a frantic, wild panic. She scrambled across the floor, grabbing the hem of my silk trousers. Naomi, please, she begged, sobbing uncontrollably. You took his company. You took his wife. You took everything. I am begging you. Do not let them take our house. The bank is going to foreclose on us next week because we used it as collateral for his loans. We will be homeless, Naomi. I am your mother. Please save our home. Marcus stepped forward, his pride finally breaking. He looked at Jamal, defeated on the floor, and then at me. Naomi, please, my father croaked, his voice cracking under the weight of his own destruction. Take Jamal's company. Take everything he has. But do not let them take the family home. We built our lives in that house. We will be on the streets. You cannot let a bank throw your own parents out into the cold. I looked down at Vivian, who was still clutching the hem of my trousers, her tears staining the delicate silk. I gently but firmly pried her fingers off my clothing and stepped back, smoothing the fabric. I reached into the manila fold last time and pulled out a heavy watermarked legal document. I dropped it onto the glass table. It landed right next to Harper's discarded engagement ring. The bank is not taking your home, Dad, I said, my voice eerily calm. Vivian let out a massive sigh of relief, a hysterical laugh escaping her lips. Oh, thank God, she wept, clasping her hands together. Thank God you paid it off. I knew you would not let us lose our home. I knew you still loved us deep down. Read the document, Marcus, I instructed, ignoring her delusion entirely. My father leaned over the table, his hands shaking as he picked up the thick paper. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. He read the first paragraph and his jaw went slack. He read the second, and the document slipped from his trembling fingers, fluttering back onto the glass. What is it? Vivian demanded, looking frantically between Marcus and me. Marcus, what does it say? It is a transfer of deed, Marcus whispered, his voice entirely devoid of life. The bank does not hold the mortgage anymore. She does. I smiled a cold razor-sharp smile. I bought your mortgage 6 months ago, right after I bought Jamal's debt. You are not being evicted by a bank mom. You are being evicted by me. Vivian gasped, stumbling backward on her knees. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. It is illegal. We have squatters' rights. We have tenant protections. Right on cue. The heavy mahogany doors opened again. My lead attorney stepped into the room holding a sleek black clipboard. He did not introduce himself. He simply handed a stack of papers to my security team, who then dropped them directly onto Marcus' chest. Those are the official 30-day vacate notices, my attorney stated clinically. They were legally served via certified mail to your residence 30 days ago. You ignored them, assuming the bank would grant you another extension. They expired yesterday at midnight. You are officially trespassing on property owned by Vanguard Capital. No, Vivian shrieked, clutching her head. Our things, our clothes, the family albums, you cannot just lock us out. I picked up the remote control from the side table and aimed it at the massive smart television mounted on the wall. I did not lock you out, I said, pressing a button. I moved you out. The screen flickered to life, displaying a crystal-clear live security feed. It was a wide-angle shot of their sprawling suburban home, the same home where I was told I would never amount to anything. But the front yard was entirely different. 3 massive moving trucks were parked in the driveway. A team of professional movers was carrying out the last of their furniture. Every single item you own has been carefully packed and transported to a climate-controlled storage facility in the industrial district, I explained, watching the color drain from their faces. The storage unit is prepaid for exactly 30 days. After that, you are responsible for the bill. Jamal, still pinned to the floor, managed to turn his head to look at the screen. Why are there bulldozers? He choked out. On the live feed, 2 massive yellow bulldozers were idling on the front lawn, their heavy metal treads tearing up Vivian's prized rose bushes. Because I rezoned the property last month, I replied, leaning against the glass table. I am tearing down the house to build a commercial community center for disadvantaged youth. A place where kids can learn financial literacy, so their parents can never exploit them the way you exploited me. I gave a subtle nod to my attorney. He tapped a command into his tablet. On the screen, the bulldozers lurched forward. Vivian screamed a gut-wrenching, agonizing sound as the heavy machinery crashed into the front porch of their legacy home, splintering the wooden columns and tearing down the front door. Dust and debris exploded into the air as the roof of the porch caved in. They watched in absolute paralyzed horror as their entire world was physically and literally demolished in real time. The legacy Marcus boasted about the status. Vivian worshipped the safety net. Jamal relied on all of it turned to dust on a high-definition screen. It is time for you to leave, I said, my voice cutting through their hysterical sobbing. My attorney dropped one final set of folders onto the table. These are non-disclosure agreements and standard restraining orders, he explained. If any of you attempt to contact Naomi Vanguard Capital or any affiliated entities, or if you breathe a single word of this to the press, the files containing your forged loan documents and fraudulent life insurance policies will be sent directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sign them now. Broken, destitute, and terrified of federal prison, they did not argue. Marcus' hands shook as he scrawled his signature. Vivian could barely hold the pen, her tears soaking the paper. Jamal, released just enough by the guards to sign, aggressively scribbled his name, refusing to make eye contact with me. Escort them out, I told my security team. The guards hauled Jamal to his feet, grabbing Marcus by the arm and pulling Vivian off the marble floor. They dragged them out of the sitting room, through the grand corridors of my estate, and out the heavy oak front doors. I followed slowly, watching from the top of the stone steps. Their rented Maybach was nowhere to be seen. It had been towed hours ago for missed payments. Instead, a standard dented Honda Civic was idling at the bottom of the driveway, the rideshare sticker glowing in the windshield. I called a ride for you. I called out, my voice carrying over the cool night breeze. It will take you to a cheap motel off the highway. I booked it for exactly 1 week. After that, you are entirely on your own. Jamal paused at the car door. He looked back up the grand illuminated driveway, taking in the massive estate, the security guards, and the sister he had thrown away. The magnitude of his loss finally registered in his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words died in his throat. He slumped into the back of the car, defeated. The gates of the estate swung shut, the heavy iron locking with a definitive, satisfying clank. I turned around and walked back into my mansion. The toxic weight that had suffocated me for my entire life was completely severed. I returned to the main ballroom where the string quartet was still playing. I picked up a fresh glass of wine, walked over to William Sterling, and signed the final acquisition papers. I had lost a family of parasites, but I had built a sovereign empire. Blood does not make a family, respect does. I had to bury the submissive daughter they wanted in order to become the titan they feared. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace and your future? Tell me your story in the comments. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of surviving and thriving. The silence in the room stretched out heavy and thick as the chairman's words finally settled into their minds. The revelation that I was not a maid, but the sole owner of Vanguard Capital, hung in the air like a physical weight pressing down on their chests. Vivian stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her eyes darting around the opulent sitting room as if seeing it for the very first time. The fake tears that had been streaming down her face just moments before dried up instantly. Her posture completely changed. The aggressive defensive stance melted away, replaced by a sudden sickening warmth. She took a step toward me, her hands clasped together in front of her chest, her eyes wide with a greedy, desperate light. The daughter she had discarded was now a billionaire, and her survival instincts kicked into high gear. Marcus stood right behind her, his broad shoulders relaxing as he quickly assessed the power dynamic in the room. He cleared his throat, adjusting his cheap suit jacket, and plastered on a smile that I had only ever seen him use when talking to bank managers or wealthy investors. It was the smile of a man who thought he had just struck gold. He looked at Jamal, who was still paralyzed by the shock of his impending bankruptcy, and then turned his full attention back to me. The sheer audacity of their transition was breathtaking. There was no apology for the forged documents or remorse for the years of silence. There was only the naked, calculating realization that I possessed the capital they so desperately craved. "Naomi, my beautiful, brilliant girl!" Vivian shrieked, her voice pitching upward in a desperate attempt to sound maternal and loving. She rushed forward, holding her arms out wide as if she were greeting a beloved child returning from a long journey. "I knew it. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness. We always saw the potential in you, even when you were young. That is why we pushed you so hard, Naomi. That is why we demanded excellence from you. We knew you had the strength to carry the weight of this family. Look at you now. Look at this incredible life you have built. You are a titan. You are exactly the woman I raised you to be." She closed the distance between us, reaching out to wrap her arms around my shoulders in a smothering display of manufactured affection. I stood perfectly still, my muscles tense as her expensive knockoff perfume filled my senses. She patted my back, her hands gripping my silk loungewear a little too tightly. Marcus chimed in, stepping up beside her and placing a heavy hand on my arm. "Your mother is right, Naomi," he boomed, his voice thick with fake paternal pride. "We made some hard choices back then, but look at the results. The struggle made you strong. We gave you the drive to succeed. If we had coddled you, if we had protected you from the harsh realities of the business world, you would never have become the owner of Vanguard Capital. We gave you the hunger to win." The twisted logic of their manipulation was astounding. They were actively trying to take credit for my success, claiming that their felony identity theft and emotional abuse were actually calculated parenting strategies designed to forge me into a billionaire. They wanted me to believe that abandoning me and destroying my credit score was a gift. Vivian pulled back slightly, but kept her hands firmly on my shoulders, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "And now that you are so incredibly blessed, Naomi," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you can fix everything. You can save us. Jamal is about to lose his entire company. The bank is going to call in his loans and he will be ruined. But you have the power to stop it. You own the debt." Marcus nodded vigorously, squeezing my arm. $5 million is nothing to you now, Naomi. It is pocket change for a woman in your position. You can write a check right now and clear your brother's ledger. You can save his legacy. We are a family, and family protects its own. You can pay off his company debt, and we can all move forward together. We can be the powerful, united family we were always meant to be. You just need to do your duty and lift your brother up. Hai is about to lose everything he has worked for, and you are the only one who can pull him out of the fire. I listened to their desperate pleas, analyzing every empty promise and every manipulative tactic. They did not see a daughter or a sister standing in front of them. They only saw a lifeline, an endless source of capital to fund their delusions. They expected me to reward their cruelty with my hard-earned wealth. The absolute entitlement was sickening. I felt a cold surge of clarity wash over me, solidifying the decision I had made months ago when I first initiated the hostile takeover of their debt. I did not build my empire to become their savior. I built it to become their reckoning. I calmly reached up and removed Vivian's trembling hands from my shoulders, my movements slow and deliberate. I took a very distinct and perfectly measured step backward, physically and emotionally, severing the false connection she was desperately trying to forge right now. The fabricated warmth in the room vanished, instantly replaced by a chilling, heavy silence. I looked at Vivian, then at Marcus, then at the sweating, pathetic figure of my oldest brother shivering before me. I picked up my expensive crystal wine glass from the polished glass table, the warm light catching the deep red liquid swirling inside it. Why would I save a company that has not produced a single working product in 3 years? The question hung in the air like a guillotine. Jamal flinched, shrinking away from the sheer force of my logic. He had spent half a decade pretending to be a Silicon Valley prodigy while burning through stolen cash, and now the bill had finally come due. But it was Harper who finally snapped. The polished, socially conscious corporate wife routine shattered into a million jagged pieces. She had married Jamal because she believed he was her golden ticket to the upper echelons of black tech royalty. She wanted the magazine covers, the charity galas, and the generational wealth without lifting a single finger to earn it. Now, standing in my sitting room and realizing the man she married was entirely bankrupt, her true colors bled through the cracks of her fragile composure. She stomped her designer heel against the marble floor, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. "You are absolutely pathetic, Naomi," she screamed, her voice shrill and grating against the elegant acoustics of the room. "You sit up here in your massive mansion judging us like you are some kind of god. Do you hear yourself right now? You are holding a grudge over a few loans from 5 years ago. You clearly survived. You are clearly doing better than all of us. But you are so incredibly bitter and jealous of your brother that you would rather watch his entire life burn to the ground than write a simple check." I did not flinch. I simply watched her unravel, marveling at the magnitude of her entitlement. She was standing in a house I bought with money I bled for, demanding I surrender my wealth to a man who committed felony identity theft against me. "You do not care about family!" Harper shrieked, taking a step closer to the glass table, her chest heaving with aggressive indignation. "You are a cold, heartless woman. Jamal is your own flesh and blood. He made a mistake when he was young and ambitious, trying to build a legacy for all of us. What about my son Naomi? What about your own nephew? Do you even care that a little boy is going to suffer because of your petty, vindictive ego? If the bank takes Jamal's company, they take our house. They take our cars. They take the food out of my child's mouth. You are practically throwing a baby out onto the streets tonight. Are you proud of that? Are you proud that you are making an innocent child homeless, just to prove you are the smartest person in the room?" Her weaponization of her child was as predictable as it was disgusting. She thought throwing her son into the crossfire would trigger a maternal instinct I was supposed to inherently possess. Vivian, seeing an opening, immediately chimed in, nodding vigorously. "Listen to her, Naomi," Vivian pleaded, her voice trembling with fresh tears. "Harper is right. Think about your sweet, innocent nephew. You cannot abandon a child." Marcus grunted his agreement, crossing his arms. "This is bigger than your bruised ego," he barked, attempting to sound authoritative despite standing in my territory. "You have a moral obligation to protect that boy. You have billions. You will not even notice the money is gone. Do the right thing and save your nephew's future." Harper felt entirely emboldened by my parents blindly backing her up so easily. The twisted validation fed right into her massive superiority complex. She quickly straightened her rigid posture, crossing her arms tightly over her chest as she stepped forward. She sneered at me, her eyes flashing with a sickening mix of triumph and pure vicious disdain. "You see," Harper spat, leaning over the glass table and glaring directly into my eyes. "Everyone knows you are in the wrong here. You are just a sad, lonely woman with a big bank account and zero actual love in your life. You want to destroy Jamal's family because you could never build one of your own. You are punishing my son because you are miserable. So stop playing these ridiculous power games. Sign the guarantee papers, clear the debt, and let us get back to our lives. If you do not, I swear I will go to every news outlet in Atlanta and tell them exactly how Vanguard Capital is run by a monster who evicts her own infant nephew for sport." The threat hung in the air, pathetic and entirely hollow. She genuinely believed she possessed leverage. She thought the threat of bad press would force a billionaire to surrender. I let her finish her temper tantrum, allowing the silence to stretch out long enough to make her shift uncomfortably on her feet. She was practically shaking with adrenaline, completely convinced that her performance had backed me into an inescapable corner. It was almost amusing how profoundly she misunderstood the game we were playing. I raised my right hand and executed a sharp single snap of my fingers. The sound echoed sharply across the large room. Instantly, the heavy doors swung open, and my executive assistant stepped quietly into the sitting room. He was holding a thick black leather folder tightly against his side like a weapon. He walked briskly to my side, placed the folder directly onto the smooth, polished surface of the glass table, and stepped back into the shadows of the room without uttering a single word. His absolute professionalism stood in stark contrast to the chaotic emotional mess bleeding onto the imported marble floor. I rested my hands on top of the smooth black leather cover, letting my gaze drift slowly from Vivian's fake tears to Marcus' false authority, and finally landing squarely on Harper's flushed, furious, entitled face. "Let us talk about your nephew, Harper," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous calm that commanded absolute silence. "Or rather, let us talk about how Jamal has been funding your shopping sprees." I opened the black leather folder and meticulously arranged the documents across the polished glass. The stark white pages reflected the ambient light, illuminating the absolute devastation of Jamal's carefully constructed lies. I did not rush. I let the silence stretch, allowing the dread to fully settle into their bones before I spoke. "Here are the audited financial forensics for Novatech Solutions." I began tapping a manicured fingernail against a spreadsheet highlighted with glaring red ink. "Over the past 3 years, your husband has received approximately $4 million in venture capital. This includes the initial seed money he illegally secured using my stolen identity and the staggering second mortgage my parents foolishly took out on their own home to keep his sinking ship afloat. Yet according to my acquisition team, Novatech has 0 proprietary code, 0 active patents, and exactly 2 employees on its payroll. One is Jamal. The other is a personal assistant whose sole professional duty is booking his flights to Nevada and wiring funds to offshore accounts." Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but his voice completely failed him. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. His eyes darted toward the exits, desperately seeking an escape that did not exist. Harper snatched the top spreadsheet from the table, her eyes scanning frantically across the columns of numbers. She shook her head, her blonde hair falling into her face. "This is fake," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the paper. "These are fabricated documents. Jamal is developing a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform. He pitches to investors every week. We just hosted a gala for his lead developers." "You hosted a gala for hired actors," I corrected smoothly, sliding a stack of credit card statements toward her. "Look closer, Harper. Look at the burn rate. Your brilliant husband did not invest a single dime of that capital into research and development. He invested it into the high-limit baccarat tables at the Bellagio. $2 million lost to the house in 36 months. Another $500,000 drained on private jet charters so he could play the part of a successful founder. And let us not forget the $400,000 funneled directly into your personal checking accounts to maintain the grand illusion that you married wealth." Harper stared at the statements, her hands trembling so violently the paper rattled loudly in the quiet room. She saw the itemized charges for luxury boutiques, the five-star resorts, and the custom jewelry she paraded on her social media. Then her eyes locked onto a specific highlighted transaction. Her face twisted into a mask of pure confusion and rising panic. "A $75,000 charge at Cartier," she whispered, her voice cracking. She slowly turned to look at Jamal, who was visibly sweating now. "Jamal, you told me that was a business expense for client gifts. You never gave me anything from Cartier. Who did you buy diamonds for?" Jamal scrambled backward, holding his hands up defensively. "Harper, baby. I can explain. It was for a marketing executive. We had to secure a vendor contract, and she wanted a specific piece to seal the deal. It was strictly business, I swear to you." I slid a high-resolution photograph across the glass table. It was an image taken from an exclusive society blog showing Jamal at a charity gala in Miami last year. He had his arm wrapped tightly around a local influencer. She was wearing a stunning, incredibly recognizable diamond collar. "I do not think she is a marketing executive," I stated coldly, watching the realization physically strike Harper. "I think she is just one of the many distractions Jamal purchased using my stolen credit and his parents' retirement fund. He has been draining every single account dry to play the billionaire playboy while you stayed home posting about being a proud corporate wife." Marcus grabbed the edge of the table, his chest heaving as he finally looked at his son with absolute disgust instead of pride. "Jamal," he growled, his voice vibrating with anger. "Tell me this is a lie. Tell me you did not gamble away the money from our house. We gave you everything. We risked our entire retirement for your vision." Jamal shrank under his father's glare, his arrogant posture entirely gone. "I was going to win it back," he pleaded, his voice pitching into a pathetic whine. "I just needed one big hit. The algorithm was going to sell. I just needed more time to make it look operational. I was protecting this family. I was building our legacy. And Harper, you cannot be mad at me. You demanded this lifestyle. You told me you would not stay if I could not provide the luxury you deserved. I did this for you." "I built a shell company to fund your addictions," I snapped, cutting off his pathetic excuses. "And you, Harper, happily spent the stolen money without ever questioning where it came from. You loved the designer bags and the leased Maybachs too much to care if your husband was a fraud. You wanted the status without the work. Now you have nothing but a bankrupt felon for a husband." The sound of Harper's palm striking Jamal's face echoed through the sitting room like a gunshot. The physical impact sent him stumbling backward. Harper lunged at him, her perfectly manicured facade disintegrating into absolute fury. She pummeled his chest, screaming at the top of her lungs, all pretense of superiority completely vanishing. "You lied to me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You told me you were a genius. You told me we were going to be richer than everyone in my family. You took my youth, you gave me a child, and you spent our entire future on gambling and other women. You are a broke, pathetic fraud. You are nothing." The perfect marriage, the grand illusion they had weaponized against me for half a decade, shattered into a million jagged pieces right there on my imported marble floor. Vivian shrieked, lunging forward to physically tear Harper away from her precious golden boy. Marcus followed immediately, his heavy footsteps thudding against the marble as he grabbed Harper's arms and hauled her backward. The sitting room devolved into a chaotic wrestling match. Harper kicked and thrashed, her designer heels scraping against the floor, while she hurled every vicious insult she could summon at the man she had just violently discarded. Jamal remained slumped in the velvet armchair, bleeding slightly from a scratch on his cheek, his eyes vacant and utterly defeated. The facade of black tech royalty was dead, and the rotting corpse of his reality was stinking up my mansion. "Stop it!" Vivian wailed, pushing herself between the estranged couple. She held her hands out defensively, shielding Jamal from his infuriated wife. "Are you crazy, Harper? Do not strike my son. He is under immense pressure. He made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can still save everything." Marcus turned away from the domestic brawl and locked his desperate, panicked eyes entirely on me. His chest heaved and sweat beaded on his forehead. The proud, authoritative patriarch was gone, replaced by a cornered animal begging for a scrap of survival. He stepped toward the glass table, his hands trembling as he gestured wildly at the mess of financial documents scattered across the surface. "Naomi, please!" Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with a pathetic vulnerability I had never heard from him before. Look at what is happening to your family. Look at this absolute destruction. You have made your point. You proved you are the smarter one, the successful one. We see it now. We acknowledge your power. But you cannot let this end in complete tragedy. You cannot sit there with billions of dollars and watch your own brother face federal prison. Vivian abandoned her protective stance over Jamal and rushed to my side. She fell to her knees again, ignoring the way her expensive silk dress bunched uncomfortably against the hard floor. She reached out, hovering her hands just inches from my legs, too afraid of my security guards to actually touch me again. Just write the check, Naomi. Vivian sobbed, her voice echoing with raw, unfiltered desperation. Write a check for $5 million. It is nothing to you. It is a fraction of your wealth. Pay off the bank, pay off the creditors, make this pain go away. We will do whatever you want. We will apologize publicly. We will bow to you. Just give Jamal a clean slate so we can go back to being a family. Please, Naomi, end this nightmare. I looked down at the two people who had brought me into this world. I watched them beg for the salvation of the son who had robbed them blind and jeopardized their entire future. They were willing to sacrifice their dignity, their pride, and their moral compass, just to maintain the illusion of Jamal's superiority. Even now, after seeing the absolute proof of his gambling addictions and his blatant infidelity, their only solution was to demand that I open my wallet to shield him from the consequences of his own actions. The sheer audacity was almost majestic. I picked up my wine glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The vintage Cabernet tasted heavy and rich, a sharp contrast to the sour desperation polluting the air in the room. I swallowed, set the crystal glass back down on the table, and folded my hands neatly in my lap. I let the silence stretch out, allowing their pathetic begging to hang in the atmosphere until it choked them. I am not writing a check, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous register that commanded immediate silence. The fighting stopped. Harper's crying ceased. Marcus lowered his hands and Vivian's sobbing hitched in her throat. I am not clearing his debt. I continued, locking eyes with my mother. I am not saving this family, and I am certainly not making your pain go away. You think this is just about the money. You think I severed every tie, changed my name, and hid from the world for half a decade simply because you ruined my credit score. Marcus frowned, confusion warring with his panic. What else could it be, he demanded defensively. We took out loans in your name. We admit it. Clearly recovered. Why else would you hold such a venomous grudge against your own flesh and blood? You are punishing us over a financial error. I reached for the sleek silver tablet resting on the edge of the glass table. I did not look at the financial forensics anymore. I swiped past the credit card statements, past the venture capital breakdowns, and past the photographic evidence of Jamal's infidelity. I opened a separate encrypted file and pressed the projection icon. The massive smart television mounted on the wall flickered. The screen shifted instantly, illuminating the room with a harsh white glare. 3 scanned documents were displayed side by side in glaring high definition. The legal jargon was dense, but the bold headers and the fill-in-the-blank sections were impossible to misunderstand. Jamal squinted at the screen, his red-rimmed eyes trying to focus on the text. Harper wiped her face, stepping closer to the television. She read the top lines and physically recoiled, bringing a hand to her mouth in pure horror. She finally realized the depths of the depravity bred into the family she had married into. Marcus and Vivian remained frozen, staring at the glowing screen, as if a demon had just materialized in the room. The color rapidly drained from my mother's face, leaving her looking entirely sickly and hollow. Her breath caught in a sharp, ragged gasp. You did not just want my credit, Mom, I said, standing up from my chair and towering over her kneeling form. The icy fire that had sustained me for 5 years finally burned through my calm facade. I pointed at the screen, my finger tracing the air toward the highly classified documents. When my credit ran out, when the bank started calling, when Jamal's first company was officially drowning, you realized you had a massive problem. But you also realized you had a daughter who was suffering from severe clinical depression. A daughter who was barely surviving the stress of her corporate job and the relentless emotional abuse of her parents. A daughter who had spoken openly about not wanting to be here anymore. Vivian shook her head frantically, holding her hands up as if to block out my words. No, Naomi, please do not say it. I will say it. I snapped, my voice echoing like thunder across the marble floors. You took out 3 policies on my life 5 years ago with Jamal as the sole beneficiary. You didn't just want my credit, Mom. You were betting on me not surviving my depression so Jamal could get a payout. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Their absolute depravity was finally laid bare. Vivian covered her face, sobbing into her palms, but her tears were no longer a weapon. They were the tears of a coward who had just been stripped of her final defense. Marcus stepped backward, hitting the velvet sofa, causing him to collapse onto the cushions. He stared at the glowing screen illuminating the insurance policies, his jaw working silently as he tried and failed to formulate a lie. Harper looked physically ill, retreating toward the mahogany doors, eager to distance herself from the monstrous family she had married into. But Jamal did not look at the screen. He looked at me. The realization that I had known about their grotesque contingency plan for 5 entire years finally penetrated his thick skull. He understood my disappearance was not a cowardly retreat, but a strategic withdrawal. I left them to drown in their own greed while I built an impenetrable fortress. The walls were closing in on him. The immense pressure of his fraudulent existence finally broke him. The glossy facade of the brilliant tech founder, the arrogant golden child, who believed he was destined to rule the world, simply snapped. A low sound ripped from his throat, building into a manic, chaotic laugh. He gripped his own hair, pacing erratically across the imported marble floor. You think you are so smart, he spat, his voice vibrating with frantic energy. You sit up here in your crystal tower passing judgment on us. You have no idea what it takes to build a legacy. You have no idea the kind of pressure they put on me. I was supposed to be the savior of this family, Naomi. They told me I deserved the best. The money was an investment in our future. You were just collateral damage. You were supposed to be the stepping stone. Jamal paced faster, his breathing turning shallow. His designer suit clung to his sweating frame, entirely ruining his composed image. He pointed a trembling finger at our frozen parents. They demanded perfection. They wanted the mansion, the cars, the country club memberships. Do you know what it feels like to carry that weight? I had to fake it. I had to take the loans. The angel investors were a lie. The proprietary software was a lie. It was all smoke and mirrors to keep them looking at me like a king. And you ruined it. You bought my debt and crushed my empire. He stopped pacing, turning his manic gaze back to me. His chest heaved as a desperate glint ignited in his eyes. The venture firm is not just pulling their funding, Naomi, he confessed, dropping to a harsh whisper. They initiated a forensic audit yesterday morning. They found the discrepancies. They know the offshore accounts are empty. The federal investigators are already drafting the subpoenas. If I cannot produce $5 million in liquid capital by tomorrow morning to cover the missing funds, they are going to arrest me for federal wire fraud. I am going to federal prison. The reality of his impending incarceration hung over the sitting room. Marcus buried his face in his hands, letting out a loud groan of despair. Vivian wailed, clutching the fabric of her dress. Jamal ignored them, completely fixated entirely on me. He reached into his ruined suit jacket and pulled out a crumpled paper. It was a standardized letter of credit, heavily creased with nervous sweat. He slammed it down onto the glass table right next to Harper's discarded engagement ring. You have to sign this, he demanded, slamming his hand against the glass. You are a billionaire. You own the bank. You can authorize a discretionary credit line right now. You can clear the federal audit. Sign the paper, Naomi. Save my life. I looked at the crumpled paper, then up at the broken man looming over my table. You forged my signature to start your fraudulent life, Jamal. I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority. I am not going to provide my real signature to save you from the consequences. The federal investigators will find exactly what they are looking for. You are going to prison. The absolute finality of my refusal shattered the last remaining fragment of his sanity. He let out a deafening roar of pure animalistic rage. His eyes went entirely dark, consumed by the violent realization that his golden status could no longer shield him. He lunged across the glass table. His hands reached out aggressively, aiming directly for my throat, his fingers hooked like claws. He intended to physically force my compliance to choke the salvation out of me. Vivian screamed my name, her voice cracking with terror. Harper covered her eyes, turning away from the violent display. Marcus shouted for his son to stop but remained glued to the sofa, entirely useless. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I did not even blink. I remained perfectly seated in my velvet chair, my posture impeccable, my expression devoid of fear. I knew I was untouchable. Before, Jamal's grasping fingers could even brush the soft fabric of my silk loungewear, a blur of dark motion intercepted his violent trajectory. My private security detail had been standing silently in the periphery of the room, blending into the shadows. They moved with terrifying precision and speed. Two massive, heavily trained guards slammed into Jamal mid-air. The sheer kinetic force of their interception knocked the breath out of his lungs. They drove him downward with ruthless efficiency, entirely neutralizing his frantic momentum. Jamal's body hit the polished marble floor with a sickening heavy thud that rattled the crystal glasses on the side tables. He gasped, struggling wildly against their grip, but the guards effortlessly manipulated his arms, forcing them securely behind his back. They pressed their knees firmly between his shoulder blades, pinning the former golden child to the cold hard stone. Jamal gasped for air, his cheek pressed firmly against the imported marble. He thrashed his legs, kicking out in a futile attempt to dislodge the two massive security professionals who held him down. They did not flinch. Their movements were clinical and detached, applying just enough calculated pressure to neutralize his frantic energy. The expensive fabric of his tailored suit tore at the shoulder, a loud ripping sound that echoed sharply in the cavernous sitting room. It was a fitting soundtrack to the destruction of his fabricated life. Harper suddenly sprang to life. Her initial shock morphed into a shrill, hysterical outrage. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at my guards, her face flushed an ugly mottled red. "Get off him!" she screeched, her voice vibrating with aggressive entitlement. "You cannot do this. This is assault. I am calling the police right now. I am pressing charges against you, Naomi. You are going to pay for this. I will sue you for every single penny you have. I will ruin you." I remained entirely unbothered by her screeching. I slowly crossed my legs, smoothing the silk of my trousers, and looked directly into her furious eyes. "Go ahead, Harper." I challenged, my tone conversational and devoid of fear. "Pull out your phone. Dial the authorities. Tell the dispatcher exactly what happened here tonight. Tell them how your husband lunged at me with the intent to cause physical harm in my private residence. My security cameras captured every angle of his violent outburst in high definition, and while the police are here, we can hand them the manila folder sitting right in front of you. I am sure the responding officers will be fascinated to see the evidence of massive federal wire fraud and forged life insurance policies. We can get all the arrests done in one convenient trip." Harper snapped her mouth shut so fast her teeth clicked together. The threat of legal action dissolved, instantly replaced by the terrifying realization that invoking the law would only fast-track her husband's journey to a federal penitentiary. She took a staggering step backward, her hands dropping to her sides. She looked down at Jamal, who was still grunting and struggling against the marble floor, and the disgust in her eyes was palpable. The illusion of her glamorous lifestyle had evaporated, leaving her tethered to a bankrupt felon. Vivian scrambled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the severe lack of dignity in her posture. She reached out toward Harper's legs, her face streaked with ruined makeup and desperate tears. "Harper, please," Vivian begged, her voice cracking with pathetic manipulation. "Do not listen to her. Do not turn against your husband. He is under an immense amount of pressure. We can fix this mess. We just need to stay united. We are a family. You cannot abandon him now." "Do not touch me!" Harper snapped violently, pulling her dress away from Vivian's grasping fingers. "You are all completely insane. You lied to me. He lied to me. I am not going down with this sinking ship." Marcus remained paralyzed on the velvet sofa, his broad chest heaving as he watched his legacy turn to absolute ash. He had no words of authority left to offer. The patriarch of the family had been stripped of his power, entirely neutralized by the sheer magnitude of the crimes committed under his watch. He just stared blankly at the floor, unable to comprehend the total collapse of his golden child. Before Vivian could launch into another desperate plea, a sharp, jarring sound sliced through the heavy tension of the sitting room. It was an aggressive electronic ringing piercing the air with a demanding urgency. The sound was coming from the inside pocket of Jamal's torn suit jacket. His custom business ringtone blared relentlessly, demanding immediate attention. Jamal instantly stopped struggling against the guards. His entire body went rigid. He knew exactly who was calling him at this late hour. The frantic energy that had fueled his violent attack vanished, replaced by a chilling, paralyzing dread. His eyes widened wildly, his gaze darting toward the pocket of his jacket. The venture firm, the federal audit, the missing millions, it was all culminating in this single phone call. "Let me answer it." Jamal gasped, his voice reduced to a hoarse, desperate wheeze. He strained his neck, attempting to look at me from his pinned position on the floor. "Naomi, please. I have to answer that call. It is my lead accountant. It is about the funding round. If I do not answer, they will trigger the audit protocols. Please tell them to let me up." I looked down at his terrified, sweating face. I felt no pity. I felt no sibling loyalty. I only felt the cold satisfaction of inevitable justice. I gave a subtle, precise nod to the guard kneeling near Jamal's shoulders. "Extract his phone and put it on speaker." I ordered, my voice echoing with lethal calm. "Let us all hear exactly how the critical funding round is progressing." The guard reached down roughly, yanking the sleek smartphone from Jamal's pocket. He tapped the green accept button, pressed the speaker icon, and set the device squarely in the center of the polished glass table, right next to the damning financial documents. The quiet room was instantly filled with the chaotic, breathless voice of a man standing on the absolute edge of a mental breakdown. "Jamal, where have you been?" The accountant shouted, his voice distorted and loud through the speaker. "I have been calling you for 20 agonizing minutes. Pick up the phone, man. We have a catastrophic problem. The absolute worst-case scenario just happened." Jamal strained against the floor, his voice shaking with raw terror. "What is it, Marcus? What is happening? Did the venture capital firm pull out of the deal? Tell me they did not pull the funding." "It is not the venture capital firm," Jamal the accountant cried out, sounding as if he was hyperventilating on the other end of the line. "It is our primary creditor. The firm holding all of our corporate debt. They just called us. They executed the immediate repayment clause on all our outstanding lines of credit, every single one of them." The blood completely drained from Jamal's face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell. "What do you mean they executed the repayment clause?" He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "They cannot do that. We had a verbal extension agreement. We were negotiating the new terms just yesterday afternoon. They promised us another 90 days to secure the seed money." "They lied," Jamal the accountant yelled back, the sheer panic bleeding through the digital connection. "The original holding company sold our entire debt portfolio yesterday. The new holding company refused to honor any verbal extensions. They bought the debt specifically to call it in immediately. The bank has already initiated the aggressive asset seizure protocols. They have frozen all of our operating accounts. We cannot access a single dime. Jamal, we are bankrupt. The company is completely insolvent as of 5 minutes ago. We cannot even make payroll tomorrow morning. It is entirely over." Jamal stared at the glowing phone on the glass table, his mind completely failing to process the magnitude of the absolute destruction. The federal prison sentence was no longer just a possibility, it was a rapidly approaching guarantee. He shook his head wildly, his cheek rubbing against the cold stone, muttering frantically under his breath. "No, no, no, this cannot be happening. Who bought the debt, Marcus? Who buys distressed debt just to instantly liquidate a functioning company?" He thrashed against the security guards, screaming toward the phone on the table, his voice tearing with unadulterated horror. "Who bought the debt? Who bought the debt?" I reached across the polished glass table. I did not rush the motion. I picked up my crystal wineglass, bringing it to my lips with absolute steady precision. The dark red liquid coated my tongue, rich and heavy. I swallowed, savoring the absolute perfection of the vintage. I lowered the glass, letting it rest against the surface with a sharp, crystalline clink. I leaned toward the glowing screen of the smartphone. I said, my voice soft and smooth, slicing through the chaotic noise pouring from the speaker. The accountant on the other end of the line instantly fell silent. He recognized the tone of absolute authority. The frantic background noise of the collapsing startup office ceased. He stammered a frantic apology before the line abruptly disconnected, leaving nothing but the dead dial tone echoing in the sitting room. Jamal stopped thrashing. The security guards maintained their firm downward pressure, but they did not need to apply force anymore. All the fight had completely drained out of my brother's body. He lay perfectly still, his cheek pressed flat against the cold marble, his eyes wide and unblinking as he stared at the dark screen of his phone. "You," Marcus choked out, his voice sounding as if it had to force its way past a throat full of broken glass. "You bought his debt." "I did not just buy his debt, Dad," I replied, leaning back into the plush velvet of my chair. "I bought everything. I spent the last 5 years meticulously tracking every single financial move this family made. When I changed my name and scrubbed my identity, I did not just disappear into the corporate world. I built Vanguard Capital with a very specific strategic purpose. I specialized in acquiring highly distressed assets and unrecoverable liabilities. I watched Vivian's face crumple as she began to understand the sheer scale of my operation. "You see, Jamal," I continued, addressing the broken man on the floor, "you thought you were outsmarting the system. You thought you were securing venture capital from elite firms in Silicon Valley and New York. You thought those masked angel investors believed in your revolutionary artificial intelligence platform. They did not. Those firms were subsidiaries of holding companies that I aggressively acquired 3 years ago. I operated through proxy boards and anonymous shell corporations, so you would never see my name on the capital agreements." Jamal let out a ragged, whimpering breath. "Every pitch you made, I authorized," I told him mercilessly. "Every extension you begged for, I personally approved, just to give you enough rope to hang yourself. I watched you funnel the seed money into offshore accounts. I watched you drain the capital at the baccarat tables in Las Vegas. I let you live the billionaire playboy lifestyle because I needed the fraud to reach the federal threshold. I needed the financial crimes to be so massive and so undeniable that no bankruptcy court in this country would ever discharge them." Harper let out a small, terrified gasp, backing further away toward the heavy mahogany doors. She looked at me not with anger anymore, but with profound primal fear. The realization that she had been living inside a meticulously engineered financial trap completely broke her haughty demeanor. "And it was not just Novatech Solutions," I said, shifting my gaze to my parents. "Mom, Dad, you really thought you were living the high life. You thought remortgaging the family home was a brilliant tactical maneuver to support your golden boy. You took out predatory loans against your own equity. You maxed out lines of credit with secondary shadow lenders. You signed away the deed to the house you raised me in just to maintain your country club memberships and lease those luxury cars." Vivian shook her head, her hands trembling uncontrollably in her lap. "No," she whimpered. "The bank assured us we had time. They said our collateral was secure. We made the interest payments." "The bank lied to you, Mom," I countered, my voice dropping to a glacial temperature. "Or rather, my representatives lied to you. I bought your primary mortgage 18 months ago. I bought the secondary liens 9 months ago. I purchased the debt on your premium credit cards. I even bought the financing contracts for the vehicles you drove here tonight. I am the phantom creditor holding the leash on every single aspect of your material existence. Every time you swiped your card to buy a designer handbag or pay for a lavish dinner, you were borrowing my money." Marcus stood up on shaking legs, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are a monster," he bellowed, trying to summon the patriarchal authority he had permanently lost. "You deliberately orchestrated the financial ruin of your own flesh and blood. You set a trap for us. You wanted to see us destroyed." "I did not set a trap, Marcus," I corrected sharply, refusing to use his paternal title. "You dug a bottomless pit of fraud, greed, and identity theft. I simply bought the dirt you threw out and sold you the shovels. You chose to sign those fraudulent life insurance policies. You chose to forge my signature on those initial loans. You chose to enable a gambling addict because you loved the illusion of wealth more than you loved your own daughter. You wanted the prestige of black excellence without putting in a single ounce of actual work." Jamal let out a dry, hollow sob. His manicured hands twitched against the marble floor. "You took everything from me," he cried out, his voice completely devoid of his former arrogance. "My company, my money, my wife, my entire future is gone. You never had a company, Jamal, I stated, delivering the absolute unvarnished truth. You never had any money. It was always my money. It was always my credit. And Harper was only ever loyal to the bank account you falsely claimed was yours. I did not take anything from you. I just turned the lights on and let the roaches scatter. You built a kingdom of sand and I simply let the tide wash it away. I stood up from the velvet chair towering over the ruined remains of my biological family. I smoothed the dark silk of my trousers, my posture radiating absolute sovereign control. I looked down at the people who had treated me like a disposable asset for my entire life. They were entirely stripped of their power, their dignity, and their future. There was no escape hatch, no emergency fund, and no family member left to exploit. For 5 years, you told everyone I was a failure. I said, my voice ringing with brutal clarity in this silent room. You told your friends I was a runaway, a coward, and a massive disappointment. You spun a narrative of success while bleeding my stolen identity dry. But you fundamentally misunderstood who you were dealing with. I did not just survive your abuse. I did not just run away to lick my wounds. I walked around the glass table, my heels clicking sharply against the stone until I stood directly above my weeping brother and my terrified parents. I looked down at them, feeling an overwhelming sense of ultimate vindication. I did not just build an empire, I whispered, the words cutting through the air like a scythe. I built the exact cage you are currently trapped in, and I made absolutely certain that I am the only one holding the key. The crushing reality of my statement hung in the air like a physical weight. I watched the exact moment the delusion completely evaporated from Harper's eyes. She stared at the glass table where the financial documents lay scattered like the wreckage of a plane crash. Her gaze shifted from the exposed bank statements to the forged life insurance policies, and finally to the pathetic figure of her husband still pinned against the marble floor. The man she had married for his perceived black tech royalty status was now a bankrupt felon facing federal prison. He had nothing left to offer her. Not a single cent. Not a shred of social capital. Harper did not cry. She did not scream or throw another tantrum. Instead, a terrifyingly cold calculation washed over her features. It was a brutally realistic display of pure opportunism. The polished, supportive corporate wife routine was entirely discarded. She straightened her posture, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles in her designer dress. Her breathing steadied, and the frantic energy that had possessed her moments ago vanished completely. She was a survivalist, analyzing a sinking ship and calculating the fastest route to the lifeboats. She reached down to her left hand. The massive diamond engagement ring, the one paid for with my stolen credit, caught the light of the chandelier one last time. With a sharp, violent tug, she pulled the ring off her finger. She did not throw it in a fit of passion. She simply tossed it onto the glass table where it landed with a dull, heavy clank against the pile of debt portfolios. Jamal gasped, his voice strained against the pressure of my security guards. "Harper, what are you doing?" he wheezed, his eyes widening in fresh terror. "Baby, please do not do this. We can fight this. We can hire lawyers. We can figure it out together. Do not leave me." Harper did not even look down at him. She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out her smartphone. Her fingers flew across the screen with practiced efficiency. She pressed the phone to her ear, tapping her foot impatiently against the stone floor. The silence in the room was so absolute that we could all hear the distinct ringing from the receiver. "Charles," she said, her voice sharp, clear, and entirely devoid of emotion. "It is Harper. I am invoking the emergency retainer we discussed. Yes, right now. I need you to draft the divorce filings immediately. Expedite everything. I want the papers ready for my signature by tomorrow morning." Jamal let out a choked, agonizing sob. "Harper, no," he begged, thrashing weakly against the floor. "You promised. You said for richer or poorer." Harper ignored his pathetic whimpering entirely, focusing solely on her legal counsel. "I am filing under grounds of massive financial fraud and impending federal incarceration." She continued, pacing a tight circle near the heavy mahogany doors. "He has zero assets, Charles. Everything is gone. It was all a shell company. I need you to secure an emergency ex parte order for sole physical and legal custody of Lucas. I will not have my son associated with a convicted felon." Yes, freeze any joint accounts immediately before the federal investigators seize them. I am heading to my mother's house now. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse with a sharp, definitive click. She finally looked down at the man bleeding on my floor. There was no pity in her gaze. There was only the cold, sterile disgust of a bad investment. For richer or poorer applies to men who actually have riches to lose, Jamal. She stated, her voice dropping to a harsh, metallic whisper. You lied to me from the moment we met. You used me as a prop for your fake billionaire lifestyle. You ruined your own life, and I will absolutely not allow you to drag me and my son down into a federal prison cell with you. You are dead to me. Do not ever attempt to contact us again. She turned on her heel, her designer shoes clicking aggressively against the marble. She reached for the heavy brass handle of the sitting room doors, entirely prepared to walk out of the mansion and erase the last 5 years of her life. Vivian, who had been sitting frozen in shock, suddenly snapped out of her paralysis. The realization that her golden child was not only bankrupt and facing prison, but also losing his wife and child hit her with the force of a freight train. The loss of her grandson, the only piece of her fabricated legacy that still held any societal value, was the final breaking point. Vivian scrambled across the floor, her expensive silk dress catching on the sharp edges of the glass table. She did not crawl toward me. She did not beg the billionaire daughter who held the keys to her salvation. Instead, she threw herself toward the departing figure of her white daughter-in-law. "Harper, wait!" Vivian wailed, her voice tearing through the room in a grotesque display of absolute despair. She threw her body forward, falling heavily to her knees right at Harper's feet. She reached out with trembling hands, desperately clutching the hem of Harper's coat. "Please, Harper, I am begging you. Do not take my grandson away. He is all we have left. He is the only good thing in this family. You cannot sever him from his bloodline." Harper looked down at the weeping matriarch with a mixture of revulsion and utter contempt. She violently yanked her coat out of Vivian's grasping hands, taking a large step backward to avoid any further contact. "Get off me!" Vivian Harper hissed, her lip curling in disgust. "Your bloodline is built on fraud and theft. You raised a criminal. You enabled a monster because you cared more about country club memberships than basic human decency. You have no legacy left to protect. My son is never going to see any of you ever again." Harper pushed the heavy doors open and marched out into the grand corridor, leaving the chaotic ruins of her marriage behind. The sound of her rapid footsteps faded into the distance, accompanied by the distinct slam of the heavy front entrance doors. She had successfully escaped the sinking ship, leaving the rats to drown in the dark. Vivian remained collapsed on the floor, her hands pressed against the cold stone as she stared at the empty doorway. A harrowing, guttural scream ripped from her throat, echoing off the high ceilings and vibrating through the walls of my estate. It was the sound of a woman who had just watched her entire universe collapse into ash. She curled into a tight fetal position, sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking with the violent tremors of absolute loss. The heavy oak doors remained firmly shut, sealing the shattered remnants of my family inside the oppressive silence of the sitting room. Harper's aggressive departure had sucked the remaining oxygen out of the space, leaving behind a suffocating vacuum of despair. Vivian lay curled on the imported marble floor, her elaborate silk dress hopelessly wrinkled and stained with her own tears. Her guttural wails slowly deteriorated into pathetic, ragged hiccups. The matriarch, who had spent her entire adult life curating an image of flawless black excellence, was reduced to a trembling, broken heap, mourning the loss of a grandson she viewed as a mere social accessory. Jamal remained pinned beneath the unwavering weight of my private security detail. He did not cry out for his departing wife. He did not reach for his weeping mother. His eyes were wide and vacant, staring blankly at the polished stone beneath his cheek. The golden child had completely short-circuited. His brain simply refused to process the absolute totality of his ruin. The federal prison sentence, the bankruptcy, the divorce, and the loss of his son had crashed down on him simultaneously, flattening his arrogant spirit into dust. Marcus stood utterly paralyzed beside the velvet sofa. His broad shoulders slouched and his chest caved inward as the crushing gravity of the situation finally broke through his thick skull. He surveyed the catastrophic wreckage of his legacy. His daughter-in-law had fled. His son was a documented felon waiting to be caged. His wife was a hysterical mess on the floor. And standing over all of them was the daughter he had systematically abused and discarded, now wielding the absolute power of a sovereign ruler. I remained standing by the glass table watching the gears turn in my father's head. I could see the exact moment the delusion completely evaporated from his mind. He realized that manipulation, authority, and intimidation were entirely useless currencies in my realm. He had absolutely no leverage left. The only thing remaining was pure, unadulterated survival instinct. He looked at Jamal bleeding and broken on the floor, and then he looked at me. The decision he made in that fraction of a second was breathtakingly ruthless, exposing the true transactional nature of his parental love. Marcus slowly lowered himself to the marble floor. His bad knees popped loudly in the quiet room as he dropped down beside his weeping wife. The proud, demanding patriarch who had swaggered into my mansion barking orders and demanding respect was now actively crawling across the stone. He stopped inches from my designer shoes, bowing his head in a display of profound, pathetic submission. "Naomi," he rasped, his voice stripped of all its former booming authority. "Naomi, listen to me. You have won. You have proven your point beyond any shadow of a doubt. You are the master of this universe. We submit to you. We surrender completely." He raised his head, looking up at me with red-rimmed, desperate eyes. He raised a shaking hand and pointed a finger directly at Jamal. "Take him," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with cowardly desperation. "Take his miserable company. Take every single asset attached to his name. Let the federal investigators have him. Let him rot in a prison cell for what he did to you. He brought this destruction upon himself. He deserves the absolute worst for forging your signature and stealing your identity. We disown him, Naomi. We completely disown him right here and right now." Jamal let out a weak, strangled gasp, hearing his own father throw him to the wolves without a second thought. Vivian did not object. She merely sniffled, keeping her face buried in her hands, entirely willing to sacrifice her golden boy if it meant saving her own skin. I stared down at Marcus, marveling at his absolute moral bankruptcy. "You are offering me the head of the son you worshipped," I stated, my tone perfectly flat. "You are offering me a man who is already destroyed. That is not a negotiation, Dad. That is a surrender." Marcus swallowed hard, sweat dripping from his brow onto the floor. "I know," he begged, clasping his hands together. "I know I have nothing left to offer you. I am begging for mercy, Naomi, pure mercy. Punish Jamal, punish us for the insurance policies. But please, I am begging you on my hands and knees, do not let the bank take the family home." Vivian raised her head, her mascara running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "Yes, Naomi, please," she whimpered, crawling closer to her husband. "Punish us however you see fit, but leave us our sanctuary. We are old. We have medical bills. If the bank forecloses on the house, we will be out on the streets. We will have absolutely nowhere to go. We will be sleeping in shelters. You cannot condemn your own parents to homelessness. Let us keep the house. Just the house." Marcus nodded frantically, tears finally spilling from his eyes. "We will sign whatever you want, Naomi. We will disappear from your life forever. We will never ask you for another dime. Just pay off the mortgage arrears. Call the bank executives and tell them to halt the foreclosure proceedings. You have the power to stop the eviction. Please, Naomi, do not let them take the roof over our heads. We will not survive on the streets." The sheer audacity of their selective memory was staggering. They were begging for the very sanctuary they had happily denied me when they threw me out into the cold 5 years ago. They wanted me to protect the physical monument of their fake success, while they willingly fed their son to the federal justice system. I looked down at their desperate, pleading faces. The satisfaction washing over me was absolute and perfectly chilled. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt the profound vindication of a predator finally closing the jaws of a meticulously designed trap. I turned away from their groveling forms and slowly reached toward the open manila folder resting on the glass table. I bypassed the forged loan documents. I bypassed the fraudulent life insurance policies. I reached into the very back of the file and gripped a heavy watermarked legal document. The thick parchment crackled sharply in the quiet room as I pulled it out, holding it up so the harsh light of the chandelier illuminated the official government seals stamped across the bottom. "The bank is not taking your home, Dad," I said. I let the heavy watermarked parchment slip from my fingers. It floated downward, landing with a crisp, definitive smack against the polished glass table, right beside Harper's discarded diamond ring and the fraudulent life insurance policies. The gold notary seal caught the light, gleaming like a badge of absolute authority. Marcus stared at the document, his eyes tracking the bold printed letters across the top of the page. He squinted, trying to comprehend the legal phrasing while still kneeling on the marble floor. Vivian stopped her pathetic sniffling, her gaze darting between the paper and my face, searching for any sign of a reprieve that was never going to come. Jamal remained pinned under my security team, groaning softly but otherwise broken beyond repair. And I bought your mortgage 6 months ago, I stated, my voice level slicing through the stale air of the sitting room. I did not just buy Jamal's corporate debt. I bought the primary mortgage on the house you are currently living in. I bought the secondary equity lines you took out to finance his fake lifestyle. The bank you have been dodging for the past 90 days does not hold your paper anymore. They sold it to Vanguard Capital. You are not being evicted by a bank. You are being evicted by me. Marcus physically recoiled as if the parchment on the table had suddenly caught fire. He scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his cheap suit jacket riding up his shoulders. He looked up at me, his jaw slack, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of comprehension and absolute despair. You, he gasped, his voice barely more than a hollow wheeze. You own the house. I own the land, the structure, and every single blade of grass on that property, I corrected smoothly. You handed the deed to the bank when you collateralized your entire existence to fund a gambling addict. The bank happily handed that deed to me in a bundled asset sale. I am your sole creditor, Marcus. I hold the absolute legal right to the property you thought was your untouchable sanctuary. Vivian let out a sound that I could only describe as a dying animal. It was a high-pitched, vibrating wail that tore through her throat and echoed violently off the high ceilings of my mansion. She threw her hands to her head, gripping her carefully styled hair and pulling at the roots. No, she screamed, her voice cracking under the immense weight of her own ruin. No, you cannot do this. You cannot legally do this to us, Naomi. We are your flesh and blood. You are my daughter. There are laws against this kind of cruelty. A child cannot throw her own parents out into the street. The courts will not allow it. The judges will see what you are doing. We have squatter rights. We have tenant protections. You cannot just snap your fingers and erase our home. Her frantic, desperate listing of legal defenses was almost comical. She had spent 5 years treating me like a disposable asset, a human shield for her golden child, and now she wanted to hide behind the very legal system she had tried to defraud. She believed that maternal ties would somehow invalidate a perfectly executed corporate acquisition. She believed her tears could wash away a legally binding foreclosure. You lost the right to call me your daughter the day you forged my signature, I replied, my tone completely devoid of any sympathy. You certainly lost it the day you took out life insurance policies betting on my suicide. The law does not care about your warped definition of family, Vivian. The law only cares about who holds the deed. And right now, the entity holding the deed is a corporate holding company that views you as nothing more than a delinquent tenant, unlawfully occupying an acquired asset. You are a monster, Marcus bellowed, his fear briefly transmuting into a final pathetic surge of anger. He tried to stand up, but his bad knees gave out, forcing him to remain slumped against the velvet sofa. You engineered this entire nightmare. You wanted to see us suffer. You wanted to rip the roof from over our heads just to satisfy your sick, vindictive ego. You planned this execution. I planned a business acquisition, I countered, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. Your spectacular failure was entirely self-inflicted. I just provided the venue for your collapse. Before Marcus could launch into another futile tirade, the heavy mahogany doors of the sitting room swung open for the final time. The timing was absolutely flawless. My lead attorney stepped into the room. He was impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. He did not knock. He did not announce his presence. He simply walked into the chaotic scene with the cold, detached professionalism of an executioner stepping up to the block. He bypassed the struggling Jamal and the weeping Vivian, walking directly to the center of the room. He opened his briefcase, the brass clasps snapping loudly in the tense silence. He pulled out a thick stack of manila envelopes, each one stamped with aggressive red lettering. "Good evening," he said, his voice clipped and highly authoritative. He did not offer his hand or express any pleasantries. He tossed the heavy envelopes onto the glass table right on top of the mortgage deed. They landed with a heavy, definitive thud. Vivian flinched, staring at the red lettering. "What is that?" she whimpered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "What else could you possibly do to us?" My attorney looked down at her, adjusting his expensive glasses. "Those are the official court-ordered 30-day vacate notices," he stated clinically, offering absolutely no room for negotiation. "They were legally served via certified mail to your primary residence exactly 31 days ago. We have the signed delivery receipts confirming that an occupant of the house accepted the package." "You threw them in the trash," I stated, watching Marcus suddenly realize his fatal error. "You saw the envelopes from Vanguard Capital, and you assumed it was just another piece of junk mail or a hollow threat from a faceless bank. You thought your status shielded you from consequence. You thought the rules did not apply to you." Marcus lowered his head, a sickening realization washing over his face. He had personally signed for the certified mail and tossed it onto the kitchen counter, completely ignoring the bold red lettering. He believed his own illusion of untouchability so deeply that he ignored a legal eviction notice. "Because the 30-day grace period officially expired at midnight last night," my attorney continued, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "Vanguard Capital took immediate legal possession of the property at dawn this morning. We executed a lawful eviction and property clearing." Vivian gasped, her hands flying to her face. "Property clearing," she repeated, her voice shaking. "What does that mean? What did you do with my things? My antique furniture, my expensive jewelry?" I picked up the silver remote control from the edge of the glass table. I aimed it directly at the massive smart television mounted on the wall and pressed the power button. The black screen flickered to life, instantly flooding the sitting room with a bright, high-definition glow. "I did not lock you out," I said, my voice steady and devoid of mercy. "I moved you out." The screen displayed a crystal-clear live security feed. It was a wide-angle shot of their sprawling suburban home, the exact house where I had spent my entire childhood, being told I would never amount to anything. The manicured lawn, the imposing brick facade, it was all rendered in perfect detail under the bright afternoon sun. But the scene playing out on the screen was far from the pristine image my parents had always projected to their country club friends. 3 massive moving trucks were parked haphazardly across the driveway and the front lawn. A team of professional movers in high-visibility vests was actively carrying the very last of their belongings out the front door. Vivian let out a strangled shriek as she watched 2 men haul her prized mahogany dining room table down the front steps and shove it roughly into the back of a waiting truck. "Where are you taking my things?" she screamed, pointing frantically at the television screen, as if the men on the video could hear her. "Stop them, Naomi. Tell them to put my furniture back inside right now." I kept my eyes locked on the live feed. "Your belongings have been carefully packed and transported to a storage facility in the industrial district," I explained, watching the trucks secure their heavy rear doors. "It is a standard non-climate-controlled unit. I prepaid the rental fee for exactly 30 days. The access keys are in the envelope my attorney just gave you. After 30 days, you are entirely responsible for the monthly bill. If you fail to pay it, the facility will legally auction off your precious antiques to the highest bidder." Marcus stared at the screen, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. He watched the moving trucks rumble down the street, disappearing from the camera feed. I desperately thought the nightmare had peaked, but then the camera angle shifted slightly, revealing what was parked right behind the trucks. 2 massive yellow bulldozers were idling on the front lawn. Their heavy metal treads had already torn deep, ugly gashes into Vivian's meticulously maintained rose bushes. The diesel engines pumped thick plumes of dark smoke into the clear sky. Jamal, still pinned against the marble floor, managed to turn his head just enough to see the television. "Why are there bulldozers?" he choked out, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "What are you doing to the house?" I leaned against the glass table, crossing my arms. "I rezoned the property last month," I replied. I leveraged my political contacts and my capital to push through a commercial zoning variance. I am tearing down that monument to your fake success. In its place, I am building a commercial community center for disadvantaged youth. I am funding a facility where kids can learn financial literacy, legal defense, so their parents can never exploit them the way you exploited me. You cannot tear it down, Marcus bellowed, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. That is our legacy. That is the house we built. We hosted galas there. We raised our family there. I pointed a finger down at Jamal. You raised a fraud there, I corrected sharply. You built a house of cards financed by my stolen identity. There is no legacy, Marcus. There is only a crime scene, and I am wiping it off the map. Vivian scrambled forward, dragging her silk dress across the floor. Naomi, I am begging you. She wept, her face twisted in absolute agony. Take the money, but please leave the house standing. We have no money for an apartment. We will be homeless on the street. Please have some mercy. I looked down at the woman who had happily handed me over to the wolves. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and opened the direct messaging application connected to the demolition foreman. You asked for mercy when I needed you 5 years ago, I said, my thumb hovering over the send button. You told me to figure it out. You told me I was a disappointment. Now it is your turn to figure it out. I tapped the screen, sending the signal. On the live feed, the bulldozers lurched forward. Vivian screamed a gut-wrenching, agonizing sound. The heavy metal blade crashed into the grand front porch, the wooden columns splintered like toothpicks. The roof caved in instantly, sending a thick cloud of dust up into the clear sky. The empire of lies was finally dead. The silence inside my sitting room was absolute, broken only by the muffled sounds of destruction radiating from the smart television on the wall. Vivian remained collapsed on the imported marble floor, her hands pressed tightly against her ears. Marcus sat completely paralyzed on the velvet sofa, his broad chest caving inward as he watched the yellow bulldozers systematically tear through the grand living room where he had once hosted his lavish dinner parties. The patriarch of the family was now nothing more than a hollow shell stripped of his assets, his pride, and his deeply fabricated legacy. Jamal had stopped thrashing against the floor. My security guards eased their grip slightly, recognizing that all the fight had drained out of his body. The former golden child looked entirely broken. His designer suit was torn, his face was stained with sweat and tears, and his future was completely obliterated. He stared blankly at the polished stone beneath him, comprehending the absolute totality of his ruin. Harper had abandoned him, his company was insolvent, his secret debts were exposed, and federal investigators were currently circling his rotting startup like vultures. My lead attorney stepped forward, breaking the heavy tension in the room. He extracted 3 separate thick manila folders from his sleek leather briefcase. He walked around the glass table, dropping one folder onto Marcus' lap, placing another next to Vivian, and handing the third directly to the security guard pinning Jamal. The sharp slap of the thick paper against the upholstery echoed through the quiet space, forcing my parents to finally look away from the television screen. These are your exit documents, I stated, my voice perfectly level, slicing through their profound despair. I suggest you pay very close attention to the contents, because your physical freedom depends entirely on your ability to follow these final instructions. Marcus picked up the heavy folder with trembling hands. His eyes darted across the legal jargon printed on the first page. Vivian weakly reached for her copy, pulling it toward her chest like a protective shield. Inside those folders, you will find a legally binding non-disclosure agreement, alongside a permanent restraining order. I explained, pacing slowly around the table. The terms are incredibly simple and entirely non-negotiable. You are legally barred from contacting me, Vanguard Capital, or any of my corporate affiliates ever again. You are prohibited from coming within 1,000 feet of my private residence, my corporate headquarters, or any property owned by my holding company. I paused, standing directly in front of the sofa, looking down at Marcus. And most importantly, I continued, lowering my voice to a dangerous, lethal whisper. You are permanently forbidden from discussing my name, my business, or the events of this evening with any member of the press, any media outlet, or any social media platform. If a single blog post, a single local news article, or a single whispered rumor traces back to you, the consequences will be immediate and catastrophic. Marcus swallowed hard, looking up at me with red-rimmed, defeated eyes. "What if we refuse?" he rasped, his voice cracking under the strain. "What if we do not sign your gag order?" I smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made him physically flinch. "If you refuse to sign, or if you violate a single clause of that agreement, the second half of that folder gets instantly transmitted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I replied. "Turn to the third tab, Marcus. Look at the insurance policies you took out on my life. Look at the forged signatures on Jamal's initial venture capital loans. Look at the wire transfer records detailing how you drained those stolen funds to pay for your luxury cars and your country club dues. It is all perfectly packaged for a federal prosecutor." Vivian let out a strangled gasp, flipping frantically to the third tab in her folder. She stared at the undeniable proof of her felony fraud, her hands shaking violently. "You would send your own parents to federal prison?" she whimpered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You bet on my suicide to fund a gambling addict," I countered sharply, my voice devoid of any mercy. "You sent yourselves to federal prison the moment you signed those documents." "Sign the papers," I commanded, stepping back. They did not hesitate. The terrifying threat of federal incarceration stripped away their final ounce of defiance. Marcus pulled a pen from his suit jacket, his hand shaking so severely he could barely manage his signature. He scribbled his name across the designated lines, completely surrendering his pride. Vivian signed next, sobbing quietly onto this parchment. The security guard hauled Jamal up to his knees, shoving a pen into his trembling hand. Jamal signed the documents without reading a single word, his eyes vacant and utterly defeated. My attorney swiftly collected the signed documents, verifying each signature with clinical precision before snapping his briefcase shut. "We are done here," I announced, turning my back on them. "Escort them off the property." My private security detail moved with aggressive efficiency. 2 guards hauled Jamal fully to his feet, dragging his heavy frame across the beautiful marble floor. Another guard firmly grasped Marcus by the shoulder, hauling the broken patriarch off the velvet sofa. Vivian scrambled to her feet on her own, terrified of being forcefully handled, clutching her ruined silk dress. The guards marched them out of the sitting room, pushing them down the grand corridor toward the massive oak front doors. The heavy front doors swung open, revealing the cool, crisp night air. The security guards shoved Jamal down the front steps, sending him stumbling onto the paved driveway. Marcus and Vivian followed hurriedly, desperate to escape the humiliating physical escort. They stood on the driveway, catching their breath, looking around for their transportation. "Where is the Maybach?" Marcus mumbled. I stepped onto the grand stone porch, looking down. It was towed away. I stated, my voice carrying through the cool night air. "You missed 3 consecutive payments on that lease. The rental agency repossessed the vehicle 2 hours ago while you were busy trying to manipulate me inside my sitting room. I authorized my security team to grant the tow truck access through the service entrance. Your grand chariot is gone, Marcus." Marcus blinked, his eyes struggling to focus in the dim light of the porch lamps. The reality of his complete financial paralysis was finally settling into his bones. He reached into his pockets, automatically searching for keys to a car. He no longer possessed, his hands trembling violently. Vivian let out a pathetic whimpering sound, wrapping her arms around her chest to ward off the evening chill. Her ruined silk dress offered absolutely no protection against the elements or the harsh truth of her new existence. "So how are we supposed to leave, Marcus?" asked, his voice completely devoid of its former booming authority. "We have no car. We have no phones. Your guards confiscated our devices when we walked in." "My guards confiscated company property," I corrected coldly, stepping down to the first stone tier of the porch. "The smartphones you were carrying were registered under Nova Tech Solutions. Since Vanguard Capital acquired all assets tied to that bankrupt shell company, those devices belong to me. You do not own anything anymore, Marcus. Not your house, not your car, and certainly not your communication devices." I raised my hand and pointed gracefully down the long, sweeping expanse of my illuminated driveway. "I called a ride for you," I announced. At the precise moment, my finger extended toward the massive wrought iron gates. The heavy metal doors slowly swung open. Instead of a sleek black luxury sedan, a standard deeply dented silver Honda Civic rolled hesitantly onto the pristine pavement. The rideshare sticker glowed a faint neon pink in the windshield. The driver looked incredibly confused, peering out of his window at the imposing $15 million estate and the squad of armed security guards flanking the entrance. The vehicle sputtered slightly as it came to a halt right at the edge of the property line, its headlights casting long, harsh shadows across the immaculate landscaping. "That is your chariot," I said, looking down at the three broken figures shivering on my driveway. "It will take you to a cheap motel situated right off the interstate. I booked a single room for you. It contains 2 double beds and a functioning lock on the door. The reservation is prepaid for exactly 1 week. You have 7 days of shelter. After that, you are entirely on your own. You will have to figure out how to feed yourselves, how to secure long-term housing, and how to survive in the real world without a stolen credit score to prop you up." Vivian gasped, taking a frantic step forward. "A week," she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. "You are giving us 1 single week in a highway motel." "Naomi, we cannot survive like that. We have no money for food. We have no way to contact anyone. You are sending us out there to die in the streets. You are sentencing your own parents to absolute poverty. You sentenced me to federal prison when you forged my signature." "Vivian," I shot back, my tone dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. "You sentenced me to an early grave when you took out those fraudulent life insurance policies. A week in a cheap motel is infinitely more mercy than you ever afforded me. You should be thanking me on your hands and knees that I am not sending you directly to a federal holding cell tonight. Do not push your luck. Turn around and walk to the car." The security guards took a synchronized step forward, their hands resting casually near their utility belts. The silent, aggressive threat was more than enough. Marcus grabbed Vivian's arm, pulling her forcefully away from the stone steps. He knew the negotiation was entirely over. They had played their final hand and lost spectacularly. He dragged his weeping wife down the long paved driveway, their footsteps echoing hollowly in the quiet night. Jamal remained standing near the bottom of the steps. He did not immediately follow our parents. His torn designer suit hung loosely off his frame, making him look small and insignificant. The golden child who had demanded respect and endless capital was now a penniless felon abandoned by his wife and stripped of his fabricated kingdom. He slowly turned his head, looking back up at me, standing on the grand porch of my empire. I did not break eye contact. I stood perfectly still, my posture radiating absolute sovereign control. I let him look at the indoor waterfalls glowing softly through the massive glass windows behind me. I let him see the elite security detail protecting my perimeter. I let him absorb the sheer magnitude of the sister he had so callously thrown away. Jamal stared at me, and for the very first time in his entire miserable life, I saw genuine, profound clarity in his eyes. The arrogant delusion was completely gone. He finally understood the gravity of his monumental failure. He realized that the woman standing above him was not a victim to be exploited, but a titan who had systematically engineered his total destruction. He saw the billions he could have shared if he had simply been a decent brother. He saw the protective fortress he could have lived in if he had not chosen greed over loyalty. The crushing weight of his colossal miscalculation pressed down on his shoulders, physically bowing his spine. I did not say a word. There was absolutely nothing left to say. He slowly turned away, his shoulders slumped, his head hanging heavy in ultimate defeat. He shuffled down the illuminated driveway, dragging his feet against the pristine pavement, looking like a condemned man walking to the gallows. I watched them reach the end of the driveway. Marcus opened the door of the dented Honda, violently shoving Vivian into the back seat before climbing in beside her. Jamal hesitated for a fraction of a second, resting his hand against the cheap plastic handle of the car door. He cast one final agonizing look over his shoulder, peering through the dark distance toward the bright grand entrance of my estate. He was looking at a paradise he would never be allowed to enter again. He pulled the door open and slid into the cramped front seat. The ride-share driver immediately threw the car into gear, eager to escape the tense, intimidating environment. The silver Honda executed a clumsy three-point turn and sped out through the open gates, its red taillights disappearing quickly into the dark suburban streets. Close them, I instructed my head of security, my voice steady and resolute. The massive wrought iron gates began to move. The heavy metal groaned softly as the two sides swung toward each other. They met in the center with a loud, definitive clank that echoed through the cool night air. The electronic locking mechanism engaged, sealing the perimeter with absolute certainty. The barrier between my peaceful sovereign empire and the toxic parasites of my past was permanently fortified. The gates were closed on them forever. I stood on the porch for a moment longer, breathing in the crisp, clean air, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound, absolute liberation wash over my entire being. I turned away from the heavy iron gates and walked back up the stone steps of my estate. The cool night breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak trees lining the perimeter, but I felt absolutely no chill. I pushed open the massive custom front doors and stepped back into the grand foyer. The heavy wood clicked shut behind me, sealing the toxic chaos of my biological family firmly on the outside. I paused in the entryway, taking a deep, grounding breath. For 31 years, I had carried the suffocating weight of their expectations, their endless demands, and their vicious manipulation. I had allowed their twisted definition of black excellence to dictate my worth. But tonight, that parasitic tether was completely severed. I rolled my shoulders, feeling physically lighter than I had in a decade. I smoothed the lapels of my midnight blue silk set and walked purposefully toward the main ballroom. The atmosphere inside the entertaining hall was a stark contrast to the absolute devastation that had just occurred in my private sitting room. The string quartet was playing a lively, elegant symphony. Waiters in crisp white uniforms glided effortlessly through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. My guests, a carefully curated selection of elite investors, tech innovators, and political heavyweights, were mingling and laughing, entirely unaware of the brutal financial execution I had just orchestrated down the hall. This was the empire I had built from the ashes of my ruined credit. These were the people who respected my intellect, my ruthlessness, and my vision. I navigated through the opulent room, offering warm, polite smiles and brief nods to my associates. I did not stop for small talk. My eyes scanned the room until I found the private velvet-roped alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the indoor waterfall. William Sterling, the chairman of the bank I had just aggressively acquired, was standing there with my executive legal team. He held a fresh glass of vintage bourbon, his posture relaxed but commanding. When he saw me approaching, he immediately set his drink down on the marble high-top table and offered a respectful bow of his head. Madam Chairman Sterling greeted, his tone laced with genuine admiration. "I trust your private family matter was resolved satisfactorily." "It was resolved with absolute finality," I replied, picking up a fresh glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. "The delinquent assets have been fully liquidated, and the trespassers have been permanently escorted off the premises. We will not be hearing from them ever again." Sterling smiled, a shrewd, knowing expression crossing his weathered face. He understood the ruthless language of corporate restructuring better than anyone, and he clearly recognized that I applied those exact same principles to my personal life. He gestured toward the thick leather folio resting on the marble table between us. "Then it is time to finalize the most important piece of business on tonight's agenda," Sterling said, opening the folio. "The acquisition of Sterling Bank is complete, but these documents represent the philanthropic condition of our merger. My board has fully approved your initial endowment, and the legal framework is entirely in place." I set my water down and stepped closer to the table, picking up the gold-plated fountain pen resting beside the documents. This was the moment I had been working toward for 5 agonizing years. The hostile takeovers, the aggressive debt acquisitions, the billions of dollars secured in private equity, all of it was merely the scaffolding for this specific initiative. I looked down at the crisp white parchment. It was the founding charter for the Vanguard Phoenix Foundation. I had not just bought a bank to destroy my brother. I bought the bank to fundamentally change how financial institutions handle familial fraud. The foundation I was launching tonight was backed by a massive $50 million initial endowment. Its sole purpose was to provide elite legal defense, forensic accounting, and immediate financial recovery services for young adults who had been victimized by toxic family members. We are going to hunt down every instance of familial identity theft. I said, my voice steady and fierce as I reviewed the legal charters. We are going to provide ruthless legal counsel for kids whose parents ruined their credit scores before they even graduated high school. We are going to offer grants for victims fleeing financial abuse, and we are going to lobby for stricter federal penalties against parents who weaponize their children's social security numbers. No one should ever have to run away and hide in the shadows just to survive their own flesh and blood. Sterling nodded solemnly, handing me the final signature page. You are building a shield for the vulnerable, Naomi. You are turning your personal tragedy into a fortress for others. I pressed the gold nib of the pen against the thick paper. I signed my name with bold sweepings, legally breathing life into the foundation. I signed the first page, the second, and the third, authorizing the transfer of funds and the immediate deployment of our legal strike teams across the country. When I finished, I capped the pen and handed the folio to my lead attorney. It is official, I announced, feeling a profound surge of purpose anchor my soul. Sterling raised his glass of bourbon, holding it high in the air. To Vanguard Capital he toasted, his voice carrying over the gentle hum of the ballroom. And to its brilliant, ruthless, and deeply compassionate chairman, may your empire reign for 1,000 years. I raised my glass of sparkling water, meeting his toast. To the future, I replied, taking a long, satisfying sip. I stepped away from the alcove, walking toward the massive glass windows overlooking the illuminated estate grounds. The night sky was clear and full of stars shining brightly over the kingdom I had forged with my own 2 hands. I looked out over the manicured gardens, reflecting on the treacherous journey that had brought me to this exact pinnacle of power. For 5 years, I had allowed the ghost of my former self to haunt me. I had carried the guilt of abandoning my parents and the shame of my ruined identity. But tonight, looking at the empire I commanded, I finally understood the brutal truth of survival. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, an obligation that must be honored regardless of the abuse inflicted upon us. We are told to forgive the unforgivable simply because we share the same DNA. But blood does not make a family, respect does. Loyalty does. The willingness to protect one another in the darkest moments is what truly binds people together. My biological parents were willing to step over my dead body to fund a lie. They did not want a daughter. They wanted a subservient host. They wanted an endless line of credit. I had to completely bury the obedient, compliant daughter they wanted in order to become the untouchable titan they feared. I had to destroy my own past to secure my future. I lost a family of parasites, but I gained absolute sovereignty over my own life. I built a billion-dollar holding company. I acquired my enemy's debts, and I turned my deepest trauma into a weapon of mass protection for thousands of others. I am Naomi. I am the architect of my own salvation. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace, your sanity, and your future? Tell me your story in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories of surviving, thriving, and building your own empire from the ashes. The most profound lesson from this story is that biological ties do not excuse toxic behavior or emotional abuse. True family is built on mutual respect and support, not exploitation. It takes immense courage to walk away from people who drain your spirit and weaponize your struggles. Setting firm boundaries is never an act of selfishness. It is a necessary step for your survival and self-preservation. You always have the absolute right to protect your peace, your mental health, and your future. If this message resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more empowering stories.